Tonight, we explore a different fate for Jon Snow, a world where Ned Stark, in his final days as Hand of the King, chose to do the one thing he had spent 15 years refusing to do: tell his son the truth. Stripped of every other option, facing execution and the ruin of everything he loved, Ned Stark put the secret he'd been carrying since the Tower of Joy into a letter and sent it north. That letter would reach the wrong hands, in the right moment, and change not just Jon Snow's life, but the course of the entire war. A reluctant king would be crowned in a tent in the Riverlands. A man who never wanted power would be handed the most dangerous claim in Westeros, and a family's web of loyalty, grief, and impossible choices would be tested past the point of survival. This is the story of what might have happened if Ned Stark crowned Jon Snow king. The Black Cells. Ned's last letter, 298 AC. Ned Stark wrote 3 letters in the Black Cells. The first was to Catelyn. He wrote it the same night they brought him down, the night after the throne room. After Littlefinger's knife at his throat, after 50 guardsmen dead in the corridors of the Red Keep, and the specific grinding horror of a man discovering that the city he'd tried to serve had been set against him from the moment he'd arrived in it. That letter said, "Take the children north. Take them to Winterfell. Don't wait for me." He'd handed it to a guard whose name he didn't know, offered the man nothing because he had nothing to offer, and whether the letter reached Catelyn he could not say. The second was to Sansa. Short, clumsy, inadequate. He told her he was sorry, that she would be frightened, that she was brave enough for it, braver than he'd given her credit for. He couldn't tell her what was happening because the full truth was too large for a letter and too dangerous for paper, and what was left after the danger was stripped out wasn't enough to hold her. He tore that one up. The third letter he wrote over 4 days. Not because he was slow, because every time he picked up the pen, his hand stopped at the first line, and the first line was the hardest line he'd ever written in his life, and he wrote it wrong 3 times before the 4th try stayed on the page. "Jon, your mother was Lyanna Stark. Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen." After that, the words came. Not easily. Ned had never found words easy, which was one of the reasons he'd carried this secret so long without cracking, because the specific articulation it required was foreign to him. But they came. He wrote about the Tower of Joy, not the fight, the after, the blood and the baby, and Lyanna's hand cold in his, and the promise she'd extracted from him in the specific Lyanna way, which was to say she hadn't asked whether he'd keep it. She told him he would, and then died before he could argue. He wrote about Jon Arryn, who had been investigating the succession before he died, who had been following the same thread about Joffrey's parentage that had led Ned to the same conclusions. About Robert, who must never know. About the specific danger of the name. Not Snow, not Stark, but Targaryen, the name that Robert had been spending 15 years trying to stamp out of the world. He wrote, "You are the true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. By every law of the 7 kingdoms, you are the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. I have been keeping you from that truth your entire life, because the truth was a death sentence while Robert lived. I still believe that. I may be dead before you read this. If I am, trust Howland Reed. He was there. He will confirm it." He wrote, "I am sorry for the lie. I am not sorry for keeping you alive." He signed it, folded it, sealed it with his thumb pressed into the wax because he had no signet ring. They'd taken everything. Then he did the thing that cost him more than the confession. He addressed it not to Winterfell, but to Castle Black, to Jon, who was already there, who had already taken the Black, and was therefore already lost to the world in the specific way the Watcher's vows accomplished. No title, no family, no inheritance, no claim. A man who was the legal heir to the Iron Throne, dressed in black and freezing at the edge of the world, sworn to stand apart from the Game of Thrones until the Game of Thrones ended. The irony was not lost on Ned. He'd held the secret until it didn't matter, and then the not mattering had changed. He waited 4 days for a guard he might bribe. He found one on the 5th day, a young man from Flea Bottom named Wilhack, who had gambling debts and a mother who was sick, and who took the coin that Ned scraped from the seam of his boot with the specific gratitude of a man who had crossed a line and was going to keep crossing it, because the line was already behind him. The letter went north. Ned didn't know if it would arrive before his head left his shoulders. He didn't know if it would change anything if it did. He sat in the black cells and he thought about Jon, about the boy who had grown up eating at the side table, and who had trained in the yard, and who had grey eyes and dark hair, and the specific quality of stillness that wasn't Stark at all. Actually, that was Lyanna's. Lyanna had been still like that when she was thinking. Like the world could wait. He thought, he's going to be furious. He thought, good. Fury means he's alive. The guard came on the 14th day. Ned had been in the black cells for 9 days by then. The guard's name was Varys, though he didn't say so. He said nothing, only that there was a man who wanted to see Lord Stark, and the title was its own kind of communication in a place where titles had been taken. Ned looked at the candle they'd left him. He thought, the letter is already gone. Whatever it changes, it changes. Whatever it costs, he pays it. He said, send him in. Cast L. E. Black. Jon receives it. 298 AC. The letter arrived 3 days after the raven that said Ned Stark was a traitor. Jon had received that first raven in the common hall, in front of Sam and Pip and Gren, and the particular audience of young men who process bad news by going very still and watching the person receiving it to calibrate their own response. He'd read it twice, folded it, eaten the rest of his supper, thanked the Meister, gone to his cell and put his fist through the wall, which was ice and didn't break, but opened a cut across his knuckle that he spent 20 minutes binding. Ghost had watched the wall punching without comment, which was Ghost's way. He'd written to Robb that night, told him he was coming, that the Watch's vows could go to the 7 hells because his father needed him, and the vows were words and his father was real. Meister Aemon had found him packing before dawn and had said the thing that stopped him, not a command, not a guilt, a question. If your father's enemies know you're coming, what do they do to your father to use you? Jon had unpacked. He had not slept. The letter came 3 days later, hand-delivered by a rider who'd killed 2 horses getting it north, and who had bleeding palms from the cold, and who handed it over with the expression of a man who had been told this was important and who had believed it. The seal was wax pressed with a thumb. No signet. Jon turned it over twice before he recognized the handwriting, the careful block letters that Ned used when he was writing something that mattered. The same hand as the letters that had come to Winterfell twice a year for as long as Jon could remember. He read it standing in the yard. He read it standing in the yard and Ghost pressed against his leg, and he read it again and a third time, and then he stood there with the paper in his hands in the January wind and felt the world change shape around him. Not gradually. Not the slow, manageable kind of change that people could process and adjust to. The immediate kind. The kind that arrived fully formed, and that required you to either accept it all at once, or come apart. Your mother was Lyanna Stark. Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen. The Lord Commander found him there 10 minutes later. Mormont had been doing a morning inspection of the southern towers, and came through the yard and stopped when he saw Jon standing in the cold with a letter, and the expression of a man who had been struck by something that hadn't left a visible mark. Snow. Jon looked at him. Mormont looked at Jon, at the letter, at Ghost, who was unusually still, which animals were when their people were in states that the animal couldn't fix. Come inside, Mormont said. Jon came inside. He sat across from the Lord Commander in the man's office, and he said nothing for a long time. Mormont was good at waiting. He'd been in the Watch for 20 years, and the Watch was a place that had learned patience the same way it learned everything, which was through necessity and endurance, and the absence of alternatives. My father sent me a letter, Jon said. I gathered. He says, Jon stopped. He says things about my parentage. What things? That I'm not. He stopped again. The words were in his head. They were just not coming out in the right order. He says my father isn't Ned Stark. Mormont was very still. He says my father was Rhaegar Targaryen. The office, the candles, the raven on Mormont's desk saying corn, corn, with the specific mechanical cheerfulness of a bird who had no idea what was happening and didn't care. Jon looked at his hands. His hands looked like hands. They looked like Stark hands. The long fingers, the knuckles Ned had, not Targaryen hands, not Prince's hands. That would make you, Mormont began, the true-born heir to the Iron Throne. The words, out loud, in the Lord Commander's office at Castle Black. Which is why he kept it secret, because Robert would have killed me. He looked up. Which is why Robert is trying to execute my father now. Not because of the treason charge, because Ned Stark knows the truth about the succession, and he's the one person who can prove it. Mormont sat back. He was a soldier, a lord, a man who had lived his entire adult life in the specific, austere world of the Watch, which stripped away the political calculations that consumed the South. But he was not an unintelligent man, and the intelligence was now engaged with what it had just been told. Your vows, Mormont said. I know. The Night's Watch takes no part. I know. Jon's jaw. The specific compression that happened when Jon was being told something he already knew, and that he found inadequate to the situation. I know what the vows say. I also know that my father is going to lose his head in King's Landing, and that my brother is marching south with an army that's going to fight for the wrong claim, because the right claim is standing in your office, reading a letter. Jon, I need to get to Robb. If you leave, you're a deserter. The punishment is death. Jon stood. Everything about this is death. The question is whether I die for something or from something. He looked at the Lord Commander. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you what I'm doing. You can send men after me, or you can let me go and tell the Watch I went ranging and didn't come back, and the wildlings got me. I don't care which one you choose. Mormont looked at him for a long time. Take the letter, Mormont said. Take it to Maester Aemon first. Jon's head came up. Aemon is a Targaryen. He's 100 years old. He will tell you whether what you're holding is real. Mormont picked up his cup, set it down. Go to him now. If he confirms it. He stopped. If he confirms it, you take what the Watch can give you, and you go. And you don't tell anyone where you heard it was acceptable. Jon went to Maester Aemon. Aemon. The old truth confirmed. 298 AC. Maester Aemon read the letter by touch. Not literally. His fingers didn't read words. But he held it while Jon read it aloud, the old man's papery hands resting on the surface of the paper, while the words came out of Jon's mouth. And when Jon was done, he sat for a long time without saying anything. The room was cold. Aemon's rooms were always cold. Not from neglect, but from a preference that had developed over a century. The Maester had said once that he'd grown used to cold the way stone grew used to frost, and that warmth now felt like the kind of thing that happened to other people. Rhaegar, Aemon said, finally, my great-great-nephew. My brother Aegon's line ran through Jaehaerys, then Aerys, then Rhaegar. So it's... Jon paused. It's possible. It is not only possible. Aemon's voice. The old man's voice, the specific quality of a person who had been carrying things for a very long time, and who recognized that quality in others. Rhaegar disappeared with Lyanna Stark in 282. He was killed at the Trident in 283. The mathematics are correct. A child conceived in 282 and born in 283 would be... He paused. You. He married her. That's what the letter says. I can't confirm it. I wasn't there. I've been here for 60 years. He handed the letter back. What I can tell you is that Rhaegar wasn't the man the songs made him into after the war. The songs made him a villain because the rebels needed a villain. He was complicated. He believed in things very deeply. He believed in prophecy. He believed that what he was doing was necessary. He started a war. He did. He's the reason my mother is dead. He may be the reason you're alive. Aemon turned his blind eyes in Jon's direction. They're not contradictions, boy. They're just true at the same time. The world is full of things that are true at the same time and that we wish were not. Jon sat with the letter. The watch, he said. Leave it to me. Aemon's hand on the armrest. The dismissal was gentle. The specific gentleness of a man who had watched every version of the scene Jon was living through play out over a century, and who knew that the watching was more useful than the talking. I should have known, Jon said, all this time. You weren't supposed to know. The not knowing was the protection. A pause. It failed in the end. They always do. Jon stood. At the door, Aemon said, Jon. He turned. You are not the first Targaryen to face an impossible choice. You are not the first to want no part of what the blood demands. The old man's face was calm with the specific serenity of someone who had renounced every claim he'd ever had, and who knew both what the renouncing cost and what it was worth. But you are the first in a century to have the choice at all. Don't waste it being wrong. Jon left. He went to find a horse. Robb's camp, the Riverlands, the argument, 298 AC. Jon arrived at Robb's camp on a morning when the frost was still on the grass and hadn't decided yet if it was going to stay. He came with 2 horses, one dead from the ride, one still breathing, barely, and without his black cloak, which he'd left somewhere on the King's Road because it was the most visible thing about him, and visibility was not what a deserter needed. He came looking like a man who had been riding through the night and the night before that, and who had not slept. The first person he saw was Grey Wind. The direwolf was at the edge of camp in the grey pre-dawn, doing the thing that direwolves did, which was standing very still and watching. Jon stopped his horse. Grey Wind watched him. Then the wolf did something. A small movement, barely perceptible, a slight turn of the enormous head that communicated nothing and everything simultaneously, and was gone into the camp. By the time Jon reached the main tent, Robb was outside it. They looked at each other across 20 feet of muddy Riverlands morning. Robb had grown. Not height. He'd been stark tall since he was 14. Something else. The posture was different. The weight of it. He was wearing armor in the casual way that commanders wore armor in the field, with the buckles and straps becoming so familiar they stopped registering, and there was mud on it, and there was something behind his eyes that had not been there the last time Jon saw him, which was the quality of a man who had been making decisions that people died from. You left the watch, Robb said. I did. You swore. Robb. Jon's voice. Low. Flat. The Jon voice that wasn't cold, but that had the same effect. I need to talk to you. Inside. Robb looked at him for a moment longer. Inside, Robb said. They went in. The tent was a commander's tent. The maps, the markers, the smell of tallow candles and damp wool that became the smell of command when it persisted long enough. Grey Wind followed them in and settled in a corner, which was unusual. Grey Wind generally didn't come into command tents. Robb noticed and didn't comment. Jon put the letter on the map table. Read it, he said. Robb looked at the letter, looked at Jon, picked it up. He read it the way Jon had read it, twice in silence, then a third time, and then he set it down and looked at the map and was very quiet for a while. Father's handwriting, Robb said. Yes. He sent this from the Black Cells. Someone he bribed got it north. It took 3 weeks. He, Robb, Jon stopped. Started the thing he'd been practicing saying on the road, the thing that needed to be said correctly, because said incorrectly, it would break the wrong things. He sent it to Castle Black, because he thought I was there. He thought I was sworn and out of reach and safe. He told me because he was about to die, and he couldn't die with it. Robb was still looking at the map, at the markers, at the 1,000 decisions that were piled on top of the paper like weight on a bridge. Rhaegar Targaryen, Robb said. Yes, and you, am the true-born heir to the Iron Throne. Yes, Jon sat. He hadn't sat since he'd read the letter, and the sitting was its own kind of relief and its own kind of weight. I know what that means. I've had 3 days on the road to know what it means. What does it mean? It means the war you're fighting is about the wrong thing. You're fighting for justice for our father and for the North's independence, and those things are real. But the legal argument, Joffrey's illegitimacy, the Lannister usurpation, those arguments, point at me, not at you. Robb turned from the map. He looked at Jon with the specific Robb look that was not the Lord's look or the king's look, but the brothers' look. The look that had been there since they were children, and that had survived every year and every distance, and that was the most honest thing Robb Stark had. If I knew before the declaration, Robb said, slowly, working through it in real time. The Robb process of building conclusions out loud rather than arriving at them in silence. Before the Lords declared me king, they haven't declared yet. Jon held his gaze. Catelyn's letter got to me before I left. The declaration was 3 days out when she wrote. Depending on how fast I rode, it hasn't happened yet. I don't know. Robb picked up the letter again. Read a section. Put it down. You'd have to unswear the Night's Watch vows, he said. The Watch, Mormont let me go. I don't know the legal mechanism. I don't care about the legal mechanism. That's a problem for later. Later is right now, Jon. Every decision has a later that arrives faster than you expect. Robb's voice. Not sharp, tired. The specific Robb tiredness that wasn't weakness, but the weight of carrying too many things. I've been learning that. I know. If I go to the Lords and say, the man I was going to make king is actually someone else. This is him. A Night's Watch deserter with a dead king's blood. A dead king's legitimate blood. The Lords have been calling Joffrey a bastard for months. The argument that removes Joffrey also puts a Targaryen on the throne. Robb said it flat. Jon, these are Northern Lords. Half their fathers fought in the rebellion. Half of them lost someone to the Mad King. I'm not the Mad King. I know that. They don't know anything about you. Then we tell them. Robb looked at him. We tell them, Jon said again. We lay it out. We let them make the decision. We don't hide this the way Father hid it. We put it in the open, and we let the Lords decide, because the Lords are going to have to live under whoever's king, and they deserve to know who they're choosing. Some of them will choose the Lannisters rather than a Targaryen. Some, not all. And the ones who choose the Lannisters over the truth deserve Joffrey. Jon held the gaze. Robb, I didn't come here to tell you what to do. I came here because Father sent a letter, and the letter changes the situation, and you needed to know what the situation was. What you do with it, what we do with it, is up to you. Is it? Robb looked at him. You rode 4 days from the wall. You left your vows. You came to me. You put the letter on the table. You are telling me what to do, Jon. You're just being polite about it. Jon looked at the table. I don't want this, he said. I know. I want my father not to be executed. I want Sansa and Arya safe. I want the war over. I want... He stopped. I don't want to be king. Nobody who should be king wants to be king, Robb said. Father used to say that. Father also died in King's Landing because he was too honest for the game. He died sending you a letter, Robb said quietly, which suggests he wasn't finished. Which suggests he thought the letter would do something. Jon looked at the letter. He thought I was sworn, Jon said. He thought the letter was a goodbye. He wasn't. He didn't send this so I'd come to you. He sent it so I'd know before he died. And you came to me anyway. I'm here. Robb looked at his brother. At the man he'd grown up alongside. Not equal. Never quite equal. The bastard true-born asymmetry, always a third presence in the room, and thought about what his father would have done. His father, who had been the most honest man Robb had ever known, and who had kept one lie for 15 years because the alternative was worse. I need to talk to Mother, Robb said. She won't like it. I know. He picked up the letter. She doesn't have to like it. She has to understand it. He folded it, held it. Jon, if the Lords declare for you, if this becomes real, you understand what that means. Not the war. After the war. Joffrey dies or surrenders. Cersei, no, after. You govern. Robb held his gaze. You sit in King's Landing and you run the realm. You deal with Tywin Lannister trying to undo you. You deal with the Tyrells wanting something for their support. You deal with the North and the Riverlands and the Stormlands, and I know what governing is. You've been at the Wall for 6 months. Before that, I was a Stark of Winterfell for 16 years. I watched Father govern. I watched Catelyn govern. I'm not going in blind. He looked at the map. And I'm not going in alone. Robb looked at the map too. No, he said. You're not. Catelyn, what the Tully and her said. 298 a C. Catelyn read the letter in her own tent, alone. Robb had brought it to her without Jon present, which was the right instinct, even if she could see Jon through the tent flap as he walked away, the grey morning and the familiar shape of him in northern clothes that weren't the black. She read it. Her face did what Catelyn Stark's face did, with very bad news, which was to become very controlled, the surface tightening like canvas in cold weather, smooth and unrevealing, and stretched across something that was straining underneath. When she finished, she set the letter on her knee. "He wrote this from the cells," she said. "Yes," Robb said. "Jon took it from a bribed guard. The guard got it north, yes." Catelyn looked at the letter, at Ned's handwriting, the handwriting she'd been reading for 15 years, the block letters of a man who had never been elegant with a pen and who hadn't tried to be. The specific Ned of it, the way it sounded exactly like him talking, the phrasing, the bluntness. "He lied to me. Mother, he lied to me for 15 years. Not accusing, processing. The Tully precision working on the information the way water worked on stone, not dramatically but persistently. I hated that boy. Not hated, I was cold to him. I was cold to him for 15 years because I believed he was Ned's bastard, which meant he was the evidence of my husband's faithlessness, and the whole time he was." She stopped. "Lyanna's son," Robb said. "He's your cousin." She looked up. "He's Lyanna's son. Ned was protecting him." "Yes. And I was the weapon they were protecting him from." The specific Catelyn that emerged when she was being exact about herself in ways that cost her. If I'd known, I would have. I wouldn't have. But Ned thought I might. He thought I was a risk. He thought it was safer. I know why he did it. She set the letter down. I know why. The why is rational. The why is Ned Stark's specific combination of honor and terrible political sense that has landed him in the Black Cells. She looked at her son. "Robb, Jon isn't just Lyanna's son. He's Rhaegar's son." "I know. Rhaegar Targaryen's son." She let that sit for a moment. Half the Northern Lords' fathers fought in Robert's rebellion. The other half have sons who did. The name Targaryen in this camp is also the name that proves Joffrey has no claim. The same bloodline that delegitimizes the current king is the one that gives us the strongest claimant. You can't have one without the other. He held her gaze. "I know how it sounds, Mother. I know this is... I know. You know the North would follow you. The North would follow me. But the South, the Stormlands, the Reach, the Crownlands, they won't follow me. They won't follow a Northern king. They have no reason to, and they have specific historical reasons not to." He sat across from her. "Jon has a claim they can't argue with. Jon is Robert's heir by blood. Robert died without true-born heirs. Joffrey is a bastard. Stannis has a claim, but Jon comes before Stannis, if the Targaryen line is restored." Catelyn was quiet. "You've been thinking about this since he arrived," she said. "I've been thinking about it for hours." "Yes." "And Jon? What does Jon want?" "Jon wants father safe. He wants this over." Robb looked at the door of the tent. "He doesn't want the crown. That's the honest answer. He'd rather go back to the wall." "But he won't." "No." Robb looked at her. "Because he's Ned's son. Whether or not he's Ned's blood. He's Ned's son. And Ned's sons don't walk away from things that need doing." Catelyn sat with that. She thought about Jon, the boy she'd been cold to. The grey eyes she'd always found unsettling because they were too like Ned's, and yet not quite. Not quite Stark. Something else in them. Something she'd read as the ghost of the woman she'd been afraid was the great love of her husband's life. But it hadn't been that. It had been Lyanna. But not the way she'd feared. Ned's grief had been a brother's grief, not a lover's. The guilt had been a guardian's guilt. 15 years of being wrong. The Tully in her, the river's patience, the pragmatism that ran in the blood said, you can be wrong and still act correctly. The wrongness doesn't stop the acting. You correct course and you move. "If we do this," she said, "we do it properly. No half measures. No presenting him as a compromise candidate. If Jon Snow is going to claim the Iron Throne, we build the argument as though the Iron Throne is his by right. Because it is. She looked at Robb. Which means we need Howland Reed. Jon mentioned him. Father's letter. Howland was at the Tower of Joy. He's one of 2 men alive who can verify the birth. Ned is the other, and Ned is in King's Landing. She folded her hands. We need Howland Reed to stand in front of the Lords and say what he saw. Anything short of that, and half of them call it invention. Robb nodded slowly. He's in the neck, he said. He's always in the neck. Send a fast rider. She stood. The Catelyn transformation that happened when she shifted from processing to planning. The straightening. The specific Tully manner taking over. The woman who had run Winterfell for 15 years engaging. And while we wait for Reed, we tell no one else. No one, Robb. Not the Great Jon. Not Glover. Not the Freys. No one. The Lords need to know before... The Lords will know when we're ready for them to know. When we have Reed, and we have the evidence, and we have a presentation that is not a rumour, but a case. She held his gaze. Your father was honourable. Honour is not always enough. We are going to be honourable and prepared. Robb looked at his mother. He thought, this is why father needed her. This is exactly why. I'll send the rider now, he said. He went to find Jon. Howland Reed. The Crannogman comes. 298 AC. Howland Reed arrived in 6 days. He came alone, which was the Crannogman way. He came through the marshes at the edge of the Riverlands and appeared at camp like something the marsh had produced, small and watchful, and moving with the specific silence of a man who had spent 40 years in terrain, where noise was death. Jon saw him cross the camp and knew him immediately. Not from a description, from a feeling. From the way the man moved. The careful economy of it. Howland stopped when he saw Jon. He looked at Jon with the expression of a man who was expecting to see one thing and seeing another. Not alarmed. Recalibrating. You look like her, Howland said. People say that, Jon said. They're right. He looked at Jon with an assessment that was not the assessment of a lord evaluating a subordinate, but something older and more careful. You got the letter. I got the letter. I swore to your father I'd never tell. He said it without apology. He made me swear. I kept the oath for 15 years, and I would have kept it until I died. But if he wrote it down himself, then the oath is discharged. A pause. He wrote it. He did. Then I'll tell it. He held Jon's gaze. All of it. To whoever needs to hear it. They brought him to Catelyn and Robb. He sat across from them at the map table, and he told them the Tower of Joy the way it happened, not the way the songs told it, and not the way the rebels told it after, but the way a man who was there described what his eyes saw and what his ears heard. He told them about the marriage, the secret ceremony in Dawn before the birth, conducted by a septon who was dead now, but the record existed, or had existed, in a small sept in the Reach. He told them about Lyanna, about the fever, about the promise, about Ned carrying the baby out of the tower and north. He told them about the 3 Kingsguard who died there, and what their presence meant, because Kingsguard were oath-bound to protect the royal family, and Hightower and Dane and Went had been there defending not a kidnapped victim, but a princess wife and her unborn heir. When he was done, the tent was quiet. I can say all of this to the Lords, Howland said. I can say it under oath. I'm a Lord of the Crannogman. I was there. My word is my evidence. Catelyn looked at Robb. Robb looked at Jon. Jon was looking at the table. Jon, Robb said. He looked up. We have to tell you something, Robb said. He hesitated. There was a raven this morning, from King's Landing. Jon went very still. Father is alive. He confessed. They announced it this morning. He confessed to treason, and they've announced he'll take the black. Robb held his gaze. He's not dead, Jon. He's going to the wall. The tent was very quiet. Jon sat with that, the specific physical thing that happened when news arrived that you had been braced for in one form, and that arrived in another. The internal restructuring, the rapid revision of the grief you had been carrying. His father was alive. His father had confessed to a crime he didn't commit, and was being sent to the wall and was alive. The wall, Jon said. The wall. He's going to my wall. Something crossed Robb's face. Not a smile, the wrong moment for a smile, but the recognition of the specific absurdity of the situation. He is, Jon exhaled. All right. He looked at the table, at the maps, at the markers that represented 20,000 men who were here, because a Lannister king had arrested a Stark lord. All right. He's alive. He'll be on the wall. The wall is defensible. The wall is safe in ways the Black Cells are not. Yes. Then we do this. Jon looked up. We tell the lords. We make the case. I'll do it. He looked at Howland Reed. Will you stand with me? I swore to protect Lyanna's son, Howland said. I'm a little late to start, but yes, I'll stand with you. The Lords. The Declaration. 298 AC. They had not yet declared. This was the luck, or the planning, depending on how you looked at it. The Lords had been building toward it for days, the momentum of the thing accumulating the way momentum did when a large number of men had the same grievance and the same direction, and no one had told them to stop. The Greatjon had been the loudest voice, as the Greatjon was always the loudest voice. Lord Glover, Lady Mage Mormont of Bear Island. They were ready. They had been ready since the news from King's Landing had arrived. Robb had delayed on Catelyn's council. He'd said, let's wait one more day. Let's be sure of our supply lines. The Lords had been restless, but they'd accepted it because Robb Stark had not lost a battle, and restlessness was a manageable cost. The night before the announcement, Robb called them, not the full host, the Lords, the major bannermen, the men whose decision this was and whose loyalty this required. They came into the command tent in ones and twos and filled it with the specific temperature of men who are prepared to do something significant and who are waiting for it to start. The Greatjon filled a quarter of the tent by himself. Robb stood at the front. Jon stood beside him, not behind him, not off to the side, beside him, which was the specific positioning that communicated either equality or claim, depending on who was reading it. Most of the Lords looked at Jon and read, Bastard brother, present for the occasion. None of them had been told otherwise. Before we proceed, Robb said, there is something you need to know. The tent quieted. Robb didn't look at Jon. He looked at the Lords, which was the right choice. You held the room's attention where the room was looking, not where you wanted it to go. Jon Snow is not my bastard brother, Robb said. The silence. Jon's mother was Lyanna Stark, my father's sister. His father was Rhaegar Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, heir to the Iron Throne. He let it land. My father sent a letter from the Black Cells confirming this. Howland Reed, Lord of the Crannogman, was present at the Tower of Joy in Dawn when Jon was born. He has sworn under oath to what he witnessed. Jon is the trueborn son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. He is the rightful heir to the Iron Throne of the Seven Kingdoms. He stopped. The Greatjon had gone very quiet, which was either worse or better than the Greatjon being loud, and was impossible to tell which until he spoke. Lord Glover looked at Jon, at Robb, at Jon again. Lord Hornwood said, Targaryen. His father was Targaryen, Robb said. His mother was the most northern woman who ever lived. He was raised at Winterfell. He is as much Stark as he is Targaryen. You're asking us to crown a Targaryen, Lord Glover said. His voice was flat and controlled, the Glover way, the specific tone that could mean many things and that you watched the eyes to understand. After a rebellion we fought to get rid of Targaryens. I'm asking you to crown the man with the strongest legal claim to the throne, Robb said. The man whose claim makes Joffrey's illegitimacy not just a political argument, but a legal fact. Joffrey's false succession means the throne passed improperly. It should have passed to the nearest Baratheon, which would be Stannis. But if the Targaryen line is restored, if the secret marriage is proven, then the throne never passed to the Baratheons at all. It stayed with the dynasty. It stayed with the dynasty that burned your grandfather, the Greatjon said. The tent was very quiet. Aerys burned Lord Rickard Stark, Jon said. Everyone looked at him. Not the dynasty. Aerys, one man, mad, who had been mad for years before he did it. The family paid for what he did. They paid at the Trident. At King's Landing, in the rebellion, Rhaegar Targaryen was killed by Robert Baratheon for loving a northern woman and keeping it secret. My mother died in a tower in Dawn 3 days after giving birth to me. He looked at the lords. Not all of them. The Gratian, who was the one that mattered. I'm not Aerys. I'm not Rhaegar. I'm the man who trained in the yard at Winterfell beside your sons, and who rode the King's Road north to the wall to get out of your way. I didn't ask for this claim. I don't want this claim. He held the Great Jon's gaze, but Robb Stark's father sent a letter from the Black Cells saying the claim is mine and asking me to use it. And Robb Stark is standing next to me, asking the same thing. And so I'm asking you. What are you asking? Lord Hornwood said. I'm asking whether you want a war that ends with a northern king in King's Landing, which the South won't accept, and which produces another war in 20 years. Or whether you want a war that ends with a king the whole realm can accept, because the claim is unassailable. He looked around the tent. I'm not asking you to love the Targaryen blood. I'm asking you whether you want to end this. The Gratian looked at him for a long time. The North has been calling itself its own kingdom since your father died, the Gratian said. That was good enough for me. It'll be even better when the man who speaks for the North is the king of the 7 kingdoms, Jon said. How much do the Lannisters listen to the Warden of the North? How much do they listen to the king's own blood? The Gratian was quiet. Robb said, I'm asking the North to follow Jon, because Jon is who we should have been following from the start. Because my father, our lord, spent 15 years protecting this man, and died sending the proof north, because the cause we all agreed to, Joffrey is illegitimate, the Lannister succession is stolen, points straight at Jon and always has. He looked at his lords. The North remembers. What it needs to remember is, we stand by our own. Lord Glover said he'd have to unswear the Night's Watch vows. The vows are being addressed. There's no mechanism to unswear. The vows say the Watch takes no part in the affairs of the realm, Jon said. The realm is in the middle of a succession war. The Watch depends on the realm for its funding and its men. If the wrong king sits the Iron Throne, the wall fails. I'm not unswearing the vows. I'm fulfilling the Watch's purpose by ensuring the realm is governed by someone who understands what's coming from the North. Lord Glover blinked. What's coming from the North? That's a conversation for after the war. Jon looked at Robb. One war at a time. The Great Jon stood. He was enormous in the tent. He made the tent feel like a smaller version of itself. He looked at Jon with the assessment that the Great Jon applied to everything, which was, can this man stand up? He'd applied it to Robb the night they'd called the banners, and Robb had passed it. He was applying it to Jon now. I followed Ned Stark, the Great Jon said. I followed his son. I'll follow his blood. He looked at the assembled lords. Who's with me? Lord Hornwood's hand went up. Lord Glover took a breath and put his up. The others followed, not all at once, in the specific staggered way that northern lords committed to things, each one making the decision separately and showing it separately, the accountability individual rather than collective. When all hands were up, the Great Jon looked at Jon. What do we shout? He asked. Jon had not prepared for this. He stood for a moment with the specific unpreparedness of a man who had been convincing people of a thing and who had not planned for the moment the convincing worked. King Jon, Robb said quietly. Just to Jon, not to the room. King Jon, Jon said. The tent erupted. Jon and Robb, after. The cost begins. They found each other outside the tent afterward. Not immediately. There were things to do. Protocols to initiate. A camp that was processing an announcement that had restructured the war it was fighting. But an hour later, when the lords had dispersed to their companies, and the camp had settled into the specific buzzing noise of a large number of men absorbing a significant change, Robb found Jon standing at the edge of camp, looking north. You made a good speech, Robb said. I repeated your argument back to them with different words. That's what speeches are. Jon looked at the dark northern horizon. The specific Jon look that Robb had been reading his whole life, and that said, I am processing something, and the processing is not finished. Father is alive, Jon said. He is. He sent the letter expecting to die. He confessed expecting to die. He took the black because... He stopped. He took the black, and now I'm the king. And I can pardon. Can I pardon my own father? Is that how this works? You'd have to be on the throne first. Right. First, he turned from the north. The Jon face when it was doing the specific thing of taking something enormously complicated and compressing it into something manageable. We're going to have problems. Tell me new ones. The phrase. Jon looked at the map in his head. Walder Frey holds the twins. We need the river crossing. He's been demanding a price for it, a marriage alliance with your family. He wanted Arya or you. Now that he'll want something from you instead. He'll want a Targaryen betrothal, which means offering one of his daughters or granddaughters a marriage to the king or the king's future children, neither of which I can agree to while the war is ongoing, without it looking like I'm selling the succession. What do you do instead? I cross the river without his permission, and deal with the Frey problem afterward from a position of strength. Jon looked at him. Which means we fight our way across if we have to. We'll lose men. We'll lose fewer men than a war that drags another year because we don't have the crossing. He held the gaze. Robb, I need you to be honest with me. When haven't I been? When I was growing up. You were always nicer than the truth required. Robb's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Fair? Ask.
The Lords are with me now. Tonight. Because you put your credibility behind me, and because the Great Jon went first, and because I said something that made a certain kind of sense when I said it in that tent. Jon looked at the camp. Tomorrow morning they're going to start having second thoughts. Not all of them, but some. The Targaryen name is going to become a problem. The Watch desertion is going to become a problem. Every time we lose a battle, it's going to be because the king is half Southron and doesn't know the North's ways. Every time we win, they'll say Robb won it for us. Some of that's true. Some of it. The Targaryen name is a real problem, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. He looked at Robb.
What do I do about it? Robb thought about this. Actually, thought about it. The Robb process of going quiet and letting the problem sit until it produced something useful. You need them to see the Stark half first and the Targaryen half second, Robb said. Which means doing things they associate with Starks rather than Targaryens. Like what? Going to battle. Not from the back, from the front. The Lords respect men who fight their own fights. Ride at the van. Take a wound that doesn't kill you. Win something dramatic. Robb, I'm not saying get killed. I'm saying be present. Be northern in every visible way. Wear grey, not dragon colours. Don't invoke Targaryen history. When you write letters south, sign them Jon Stark, if you have to. That would be a lie. It's a tool. He met Jon's eyes. Jon, we're fighting a war with tools that include deception. You know this. Father tried to fight without them and is dead, Jon finished. Or close enough. I know. He looked at his hands. I'm not father. No. Robb said it directly. You're not. That's the point. He was exactly what the North needed to be led. He was the wrong man to send to King's Landing alone. And you're something neither of us has a word for yet. You're Ned Stark's son, who's actually Rhaegar Targaryen's son, and you've been raised northern, and you've been trained at the Wall, and you know both things, the political and the real. Robb looked at him. You're a better king than father would have been. He was a better man. Those aren't the same thing. Jon held his brother's gaze. You should have been king, Jon said. You'd be better at it than me. Maybe. But I wouldn't be legitimate. He shrugged. The Robb shrug. The specific movement that communicated. This is the situation, and I've accepted it, and I'm moving on. Besides, now I get to win battles and let you deal with the Lords and the Ravens and the marriage negotiations. That's exactly how it's going to work. He almost smiled. The great thing about not being king is you get to fight things instead of talking about them. I hate this already, Jon said. I know. Robb clapped him on the shoulder. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we cross the river. The twins, what Walder Frey wanted. 298 AC. Walder Frey had been expecting Robb Stark. He had been expecting Robb Stark and the offer of a Stark marriage in exchange for the crossing. the specific transaction that the old man had been planning since the moment the Northern Army began marching south. He'd had his granddaughters evaluated. He'd had his daughters evaluated. He'd been building the negotiating position with the specific Frey patience that was not wisdom, but was the residue of a long life of waiting for people to need you. He was not expecting the envoy's message. His Grace, King Jon Stark Targaryen, first of his name, requests passage across the twins. Walder Frey read the message. Then he read it again. He called his sons. His many sons. The dozen legitimate ones and the scatter of bastards who looked like him. Which was not an advantage for them, but which was an advantage for establishing paternity in a dispute. The sons came. The Stark boy crowned his bastard, said Sir Aemon, who was the most ambitious of the surviving legitimate sons, and who had accordingly developed the most reliable intelligence network. He's not a bastard, Walder said. Read the message. Stark Targaryen is, that's invented. Everything about a king's name is invented until the king is real. Walder looked at the message. If this is true, if the boy is actually Rhaegar's son and there's proof of it, then he's not just a claimant. He's the strongest claimant alive. Better than Stannis. Better than anyone. If, Aemon said. Yes. Walder looked at the river, the twins, the crossing, the specific leverage that 70 years of sitting on this bridge had produced. Send word back. Tell his grace the Lord of the Crossing will receive him. He would find out what this king was worth. Then he would decide what he wanted for the crossing. Jon arrived at the twins without a crown and without Targaryen colours, and without anything that communicated king except the 20 northern lords who rode behind him and the specific presence that Catelyn had described to him as essential. You walk in like you own the floor, not the room. Walder Frey received him in the Great Hall. The old man looked at Jon the way you looked at something that might be worth money and that you hadn't fully appraised yet. Up and down. Then, you look like a Stark. My mother was a Stark, Jon said. Your father was a dragon. Walder said it without particular inflection. I met Aerys once. Long time ago. You don't look like Aerys. I'm told that's a compliment. Coming from me, it is. He gestured at a chair. Jon sat. The gesture was itself an assessment. The Frey habit of watching how people responded to small things as preparation for knowing how they'd respond to large ones. You want the crossing? I want the crossing, Jon confirmed. The Stark boy, the other one, the Lord, he was going to give me a marriage. What are you offering? I'm offering you peace, Jon said. The peace of a king who remembers who helped him and who didn't. That's not a marriage. No, it's better. Jon looked at the old man. A marriage buys you one king's goodwill for one generation. The king dies, the marriage politics change, and your great-grandchildren are negotiating from scratch. What I'm offering is the specific acknowledgement, formal, documented in the royal records, that House Frey held the crossing and opened it for the rightful king of Westeros at the critical moment. That's a story that lasts longer than a marriage. Stories don't fill my coffers, Walder said. Preferential tolls on the river crossing, guaranteed for 40 years, do. Jon held the gaze. I'm not in a position to offer the marriage you want, Lord Frey. I won't be in a position to offer it for years. I need to consolidate the realm before I deal with the succession question. But I can offer you economic terms that will make your house richer than the marriage would have, without tying your fate to a political agreement that might not survive the next war. Walder looked at him. The old man's face was the specific Frey face, the lines deeply set, the eyes small and calculating, the expression of a man who had survived 8 kings by never believing anything anyone said until the proof arrived. You're cleverer than you look, Walder said. I've been told I look like I'm about to argue, Jon said. I'm told I argue well. Tolls, Walder said. What kind of tolls? Name a figure and we'll negotiate from there. Walder named a figure. They negotiated. An hour later, Jon had the crossing, and Walder Frey had a document signed by a king that guaranteed the economic future of the house for 4 decades. Walder watched Jon's party cross the bridge from the tower window. He didn't give me what I asked for, Walder said to Aemon. No. He gave me something better and made me feel like I'd won. The old man looked at the crossing. I hate that. Should we have held out? No, the tolls are better than the marriage would have been. He turned from the window. But I hate it. The war. What Robb won. 298 to 299 AC. Robb Stark had never lost a battle. This was the fact that the war produced first, and that Jon relied on heavily in the months that followed the declaration. Robb rode at the van, and Robb made decisions in the field with the specific urgent intelligence that tactical command required. Not the political intelligence, which was Jon's department, but the military intelligence. The reading of terrain, and men, and momentum that some commanders had, and that others spent entire careers trying to develop, and never managed. Oxcross. The Battle of Oxcross, where Robb's cavalry found the Lannister camp in the night and hit it before the camp had finished processing the fact that it was being hit. 12,000 Lannister soldiers against 8,000 Northerners, and by morning the 12,000 had lost a third of their number, and the rest were retreating toward the Westerlands with the specific broken speed of an army that had been destroyed at the thing that armies most feared. Which was, surprise, Jon had not been at Oxcross. Jon had been at Seaguard, talking to Lord Mallister, who controlled the western coast of the Riverlands, and whose navy was the difference between a Lannister resupply from the sea and a Lannister resupply that didn't happen. He'd been there for 2 days, sitting through the specific patience of a vassal lord evaluating a new king, and he'd emerged with a fleet commitment and a grudging respect from Mallister that was worth more than the fleet, because grudging respect from a seasoned lord was the hardest currency to counterfeit. The news from Oxcross arrived while he was riding back. He read it and felt the specific thing that news of Robb's victories always produced in him, which was simultaneously pride and relief and something else. The something else being the awareness that every battle Robb won was a battle that ended with Robb more tired and the army slightly smaller and the war still ongoing, and that the war had a shape that was becoming visible. And the shape was, Tywin Lannister was not finished. Tywin was not at Oxcross. That was the issue. Tywin had been operating on the other flank, in the Riverlands proper, burning crops and castles with the specific Lannister message that said, "You will pay for this." The burning was not a battle tactic. The burning was a policy. The policy said, every house in the Riverlands that supports this king will come out of this war with nothing, and eventually the nothing will be more persuasive than the cause. Jon called a war council. He sat at the head of the table, the king's position, the position he had not occupied before, the position he sat in with the specific discomfort of someone who had spent their life one seat to the left and who was still calibrating to the center. Robb was to his right. Catelyn was across from him. The major lords down the table's length. Tywin is burning the Riverlands, Jon said. He's not trying to win. He's trying to make winning expensive enough that we stop. We stop when we're in King's Landing, the great Jon said. We'd get to King's Landing faster if we stopped Tywin first, Jon said. Right now, we're chasing him around the Riverlands winning battles he's not in, while he destroys the country we're liberating. By the time we reach King's Landing, the Riverlands will be a ruin. Lord Tully's people will have nothing. The support we need for the long term will have been burned out of them. What do you propose? Robb asked. He asked it in the way he asked things in council, not deferentially. Genuinely, the Robb method was to present the problem, and then ask for the solution, even when he had a solution. Because the asking produced a room that felt consulted rather than commanded. We split, Jon said. Robb takes the main army south toward King's Landing. Loud, visible, everything we have that makes Tywin nervous about the capital. I take a smaller force west and make Tywin choose between protecting his home and protecting his king. Casterly Rock, Catelyn said. Casterly Rock. Jon nodded. Tywin can't ignore a threat to the rock. It's the seat of everything he values. If I'm moving on the rock with a credible force, he has to come for me. Which means he's not burning the Riverlands. You split the army, Glover said. In a war. In the right war, splitting is stronger than massing, Jon said. We're more mobile than Tywin's force. We have supply advantages he doesn't have, because we have the river. And if Tywin hits Robb's force instead of yours, then Robb fights him. Jon looked at his brother, and Robb wins. Robb looked at him. The look contained several things. The acknowledgement that this was correct, the recognition that it placed him in more danger, and the specific Robb quality that was not quite recklessness, but that leaned toward it when the situation called for bravery and strategy simultaneously. Do it, Robb said. They split. Jon took 5,000 and moved west through the Westerlands approach, while Robb drove south with 15,000. And the two armies described a shape on the map that forced Tywin into exactly the choice that Jon had predicted: defend the east or defend the west, and defending both was impossible. Tywin chose east. He turned from the Riverlands and came for Robb. Jon turned northwest toward the rock. He did not reach the rock. He didn't need to. He needed Tywin to believe he was reaching it, which required moving in that direction convincingly, which required making contact with Lannister scouts and giving them something worth reporting. He gave them a camp that looked like twice its size, fires that burned all night, supply wagons with empty casks that rattled like full ones. Tywin moved toward Robb with urgency. Urgent armies made tactical mistakes. Robb found the tactical mistake. The Battle of the Red Fork was Robb's masterpiece. Years later, the Maesters would write about it as the high point of northern tactical genius in the era, the use of terrain, the feigned retreat. The flanking cavalry that appeared from behind a ridge that Tywin's scouts had reported clear, because the cavalry had crossed the ridge before dawn and waited. And waiting before dawn in the cold was a northern skill that Lannister cavalry did not naturally possess. The Lannister army did not break. Tywin's armies didn't break. Tywin's armies retreated in order when the order was retreat. And the order was retreat because the battlefield arithmetic had shifted against them, and Tywin was not a man who threw soldiers at a situation that mathematics had already decided. But they retreated. West, toward Lannisport. Toward the rock, toward the force that Jon had spent 2 weeks apparently threatening, and that was now between Tywin and his home. Tywin was caught. Not surrounded. Tywin was too good for that, but positioned between two forces, neither of which could be easily dispersed, in terrain that didn't favor the large army, with supply lines that had been lengthened by the western movement and that Jon's cavalry had been cutting for a week. The offer Jon sent was short. Lord Tywin, the position is untenable. We discuss terms, or we continue until it isn't a discussion. Tywin took 3 days to respond. His response was, he would meet, under flag of parley, with the king's representative. Not the king. Jon sent Robb. Not because Jon was afraid of Tywin, because Tywin expected to negotiate with someone who would be intimidated by him, and Tywin was bad at negotiating with people who weren't intimidated. Robb Stark had just defeated him twice in the field, and had the specific calm of a young commander who had done the thing he was told couldn't be done, and who no longer found the person who'd said it especially threatening. Tywin looked at Robb across the parley table. "You're the Lord's son," Tywin said. "Not the king. The king sent me. The king thought you and I should talk before he came." Robb held his gaze. "He thought you might find it easier." Tywin looked at him for a long moment. "Does your king negotiate?" "He wins battles, and then negotiates." Robb met the look. "We've been winning battles. We're at the negotiating part." "He's a Targaryen. His mother was a Stark. He was raised at Winterfell. He speaks the way Northerners speak, and he fights the way Northerners fight, and he's been at the wall." Robb held the gaze. "What he is or isn't, Lord Tywin, is beside the point. He's won. The terms now depend on how long you want to pretend he hasn't. The terms took 4 days. By the end of the 4 days, Tywin Lannister had agreed to submit in exchange for the preservation of the Lannister position, lands, titles, the specific economic machinery of the Westerlands intact. He would not agree to Joffrey's execution. He would not agree to Cersei's imprisonment. He would agree to their removal from succession and their confinement to Casterly Rock, which was itself a concession Tywin had calculated he could manage. Robb brought the terms to Jon. Jon read them. "He's keeping his children," Jon said. "Yes." "I have 2 sisters in King's Landing," Jon said. "I need them out." "That's the first additional condition," Robb agreed. Jon looked at the terms. The specific Lannister legalism of them, every clause precisely hedged, every concession balanced by a protection. The document of a man who had lost and who was minimizing the losing with the specific competence of a man who had been doing that his whole life. "He'll comply," Jon said. "He hates this, but he'll comply because the alternative is worse. His army is intact, but it's caught, and he knows it." He signed the terms. "Send word to King's Landing. My father's at the wall. Get a raven to him. Tell him it's over." "Almost over," Robb said. "Almost," Jon agreed. King's Landing. Sansa, what she saw from inside. 298 to 299 AC. In King's Landing, Sansa Stark had been surviving. Not thriving. Not even existing comfortably. Surviving, which was what you did when you were 11 years old, and the world around you had collapsed, and the people responsible for the collapse were the people you had to eat supper with. She had learned things. This was what the court had produced in her. whatever else it had taken. The education. Not the education she'd come south expecting. Not the songs and the jousting and the courtesies and the elegant romance of the songs. The other education. The one the court gave you when it was trying to break you, and you refused to break. She had learned that Cersei was afraid. This was the important thing. She'd spent weeks at court thinking Cersei was powerful, in the pure sense, the sense of songs. The queen, imperious, controlled, master of everything around her. Then she'd been in the throne room during a small council meeting that Cersei hadn't known she was observing, and she'd seen Cersei when Cersei thought no one was watching. And what she'd seen was the fear. The constant, low-level fear of a woman who had built everything on a secret and who knew the secret was fragile. Joffrey was a problem. Not in the way that Sansa had thought he was a problem. Not merely cruel and capricious in the way that princes could be. He was dangerous in the specific way that powerful people were dangerous when they were also foolish, which was that they made bad decisions at the exact speed that power executed them. She had learned to be invisible. Not literally. She was Ned Stark's daughter, and people saw her and people watched her. But she had learned to be invisible in the useful sense. To not register as a threat. To not register as an asset. To exist at court as the background figure that everyone could see, but that nobody thought about, because thinking about her required considering what she knew and what she was worth, and the Lannisters had not yet decided which of those questions needed urgent attention. The news from the Riverlands arrived in fragments. First, a Stark army, large, northern, crossing south. The court processed this as a political complication, and Cersei managed it as a political complication, with the specific Cersei method of converting threats into leverage. The Stark girls were the leverage. The king's mercy was the tool. The war was the problem being solved by having the leverage at all. Then, the army won, and won again, and won again. The great Jon Umber, a name Sansa knew, and Robb Stark, her brother, who she had been told was coming, and whose coming kept being delayed by the logistics of armies and the specific nature of campaigns that didn't resolve themselves. Then, a different name. Jon. The name reached her through the servants. It always did. The news she actually needed always arrived through servants, because the court managed. Information and servants didn't bother. A chambermaid who had a cousin with a cousin who'd been in a camp said, "They crowned Jon Snow. They said he was Rhaegar Targaryen's son. They said Ned Stark sent a letter." Sansa sat with that in her room for an hour. She thought about Jon. The side table. The specific architecture of Winterfell's hierarchy that had placed him below her, and that she had absorbed without questioning, because it was the architecture she'd been given. She had not been unkind to Jon, she'd been mostly absent from him, which was its own kind of unkindness, the not cruelty that was still a distance. She thought about his grey eyes, which were Stark eyes, and about the way he'd fought in the yard, and about the quiet that he had. A Targaryen. Jon Snow was a Targaryen, and they'd made him king, and he was the person who was going to win or lose this war that was going to determine whether Sansa Stark came home. She made a decision. She went to Cersei. Not openly. She'd been given limited access to the Queen's solar in the weeks following her father's arrest, the specific controlled access of a hostage who was being useful by being compliant. She used the access. She went to Cersei's solar, and she asked to see the Queen, and she sat across from Cersei Lannister in the chair she'd sat in before, and she said, "I'd like to talk to you about Jon Snow." Cersei looked at her. The Queen's assessment, the beauty and the cold intelligence behind it, the specific Cersei evaluation of everything as a potential tool or threat. "Ned Stark's bastard," Cersei said. "His nephew," Sansa said. "Rhaegar Targaryen's son, and Lyanna Stark's. Which means Robert wanted him dead for 15 years, and Ned Stark kept him alive by lying, and the lie worked." She held the Queen's gaze. The holding was the hardest part. Cersei's gaze was designed to produce yielding. Sansa was not yielding. "He's going to be king, Your Grace. He's won every engagement. My brother is the best field commander in the realm. And Jon, I grew up with Jon. He's not Aerys. He's not Rhaegar. He's the most stubborn, most principled, most infuriating person I've ever met, and he will not stop until he's done what he decided to do." "You're suggesting I negotiate," Cersei said. "I'm suggesting you consider what you want from the outcome, and what the outcome will be regardless." and whether there's a version of that outcome where you have more or less, depending on the choices you make now. Sansa paused. My sisters and brothers, the lives of your children, those are the variables. Wars end. What you preserve before they end is what you keep. Cersei looked at her. You're 11, Cersei said. I'm 12 in a month. You're 12 in a month and you're sitting in my solar telling me how to negotiate with the man who's trying to take my son's throne. I'm asking you to think about Tommen, Sansa said. And Myrcella. What happens to them when the war ends depends on what happens to them before it ends. A long silence. You're more like your father than I thought, Cersei said. He was honest to the point of stupidity. You're honest to the point of courage, which is different. I'm trying to come home, Sansa said. Simply, flat, the truth in its simplest form. I'm trying to come home, and I'm trying to make sure people I care about are alive when I do. That's all this is. Cersei looked at her for a long moment. I'll consider it, she said. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing, and Sansa had learned that more than nothing was the only currency that compounded. King's Landing. The entry. 299 AC. Jon came to King's Landing in the autumn. He came without dragons. This was a deliberate choice, the specific Jon decision to not invoke the Targaryen imagery that would have been available to him if the imagery mattered. No dragon banners, no fire colours. The army rode under Stark grey and Baratheon gold, and the specific coalition standard that Catelyn had designed, which incorporated the stag and the direwolf and the Targaryen dragon, rendered small in the corner, present but not dominant. The message the standard was sending: we are the realm. You are the realm. This is your army too. The city watched him come through the gate. 500,000 people had opinions about the person riding through their gate, and the opinions were various and layered in the way that cities' opinions were layered. The small folk who cared mainly about bread prices, the guilds who cared mainly about trade, the nobles who cared about position and proximity to power, the faithful who cared about the blessing of the gods on the new order, the people who had lost family in the war and who didn't care about any of those things. Jon rode through it. He didn't perform. He didn't wave or shout or give the crowd the specific spectacle that crowds at these moments expected. He rode as he had ridden his entire life, correctly, with his back straight and his eyes forward, the way Ser Roderick had taught him, and that had become the way he did everything, which was with the minimum of display and the maximum of attention to what was actually happening. The crowd's response to this was not entirely warm. Some of them wanted the show. The show was the reassurance, the physical proof that the thing happening was real and significant and worthy of the disruption it was causing in their daily lives. But some of them, the ones near the front, the ones close enough to see his face, those ones were quiet in a different way. The quiet of looking at something that was not what you expected and finding it more interesting than the expectation. Robb rode beside him. Arya was at the back of the column, which was where she had insisted on being, and where Catelyn had insistently placed her in the same motion, both of them achieving the same position through opposite impulses. Sansa was inside the city already. She had sent word through the channels she'd built, with the specific Sansa competence that Jon hadn't known she had, until he'd received the first of her letters from inside King's Landing. Letters that were shorter than they needed to be, and more useful than they had any right to be. The throne room was empty when they entered. Cersei had kept her word. The Lannister guards had stood down. Joffrey had been moved to private chambers. The specific institutional handover of a city and a seat of power had been accomplished without the violence that Jon had spent months preparing for, and that had, in the end, not been necessary. Jon walked to the Iron Throne. He stopped in front of it. The throne was, he'd heard about it his whole life. Every child in the 7 kingdoms heard about it. The melted swords of the defeated, hammered and welded by dragonfire into the seat of power, the most famous piece of furniture in the world. It was uglier than the descriptions, more functional looking, less grand, the sort of thing that would have been impressive in a small room, and that in the throne room, the vast, echoing, torchlit throne room, looked like an afterthought. He looked at it for a long time. Robb came to stand beside him. "Well," Robb said. "Well," Jon said. "Are you going to sit in it?" Jon looked at the throne, at the edges, at the swords in their melted shapes. the specific ugliness of it, the weight. Not yet, he said. There are things to do first. Jon, there are things to do first. He turned from the throne. Joffrey, Sansa and Arya, father's pardon, the small council, the debts. He looked at Robb. The throne will keep for an hour. Joffrey, the problem of what to do with him. Joffrey was 13. This was the number that kept arriving in Jon's head when he thought about Joffrey, which was the wrong number to be starting from, and was also the only honest starting point. 12 years old. A boy who had been told from birth that he was king, that his word was law, that the people around him were instruments, and the world was a stage. A boy who had done terrible things because terrible things had been made available to him before he was old enough to understand consequence. He was also the boy who had ordered Ned Stark's execution. Jon sat in the room where Joffrey had been confined. Comfortable confinement, the rooms that Cersei had negotiated as part of the terms. The specific condition of a boy who was a prisoner, but who was not being treated as one visibly. Cersei had won that much. Joffrey sat across from him and stared. The stare was designed to be intimidating. It had been designed by years of practice in a court where stares had intimidated people, where the king's eyes on you produced results, where looking at someone a certain way was itself a kind of power. It did not intimidate Jon. Jon had been stared at by the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, by wildling scouts, by Robb in the specific Stark way that Robb used when he was genuinely angry, which was worse than Joffrey's performance by a significant margin. You killed my father, Jon said. He was a traitor, Joffrey said. He confessed under duress to crimes he didn't commit, and the confession was the price of the lives of the people he loved. Jon held the gaze. That's not treason. That's a man being destroyed by a system that was already working to destroy him. He was going to present evidence to your mother that your father was not Robert Baratheon, and that you therefore had no claim to the throne. Jon held the gaze. He was correct. You don't. Joffrey's face. The specific Joffrey face that was doing several things at once. Anger, fear, the adolescent's specific embarrassment of being known to be afraid. What are you going to do with me? Joffrey said. Not a question in tone. A statement with a question mark forced onto it. That depends on you, Jon said. I could try you for murder. A king who is not legitimate ordering the execution of a lord who had surrendered, there are legal arguments that produce a very specific outcome. He held the gaze. I'm not going to do that. Joffrey blinked. Your mother negotiated your safety. Your family's safety. That negotiation is binding, and I keep my agreements. Jon sat back. You're going to Casterly Rock. You and Tommen and Myrcella, with your mother, under house arrest that is gradually less restrictive as the years pass, and as you demonstrate that you're not a threat. And then nothing. You live your life. You grow up. If you're intelligent, you find something useful to do with yourself. Jon held the gaze. Lannister resources are still Lannister resources. You'll have money and position, and the opportunity to do something with both, if you choose to. I could have had a kingdom, Joffrey said. You had a kingdom, Jon said quietly. You executed the people who were trying to help you keep it. You were 12. You made the mistakes that 12-year-olds make when they're given power before they understand it. He looked at the boy, at the face that was Jaime's face under the gold. You can still learn. Not here. Not as king. But somewhere. Joffrey stared at him. I hate you, he said. I know. Jon stood. I'm sorry about that. It's not mutual. He walked to the door, stopped. Your grandfather is going back to Casterly Rock too. He'll be there when you arrive. He might not be the warmest company, but he's the most competent person in your family, and if you're clever, you'll ask him questions and listen to the answers. He left. In the corridor, Robb was waiting. Well? Robb said. He hates me, Jon said. Of course he does. He might become something useful in 10 years if someone pays attention to him and doesn't tell him he's destined for glory. Jon looked at the door. Tywin's going to be difficult about this. Tywin's always difficult. More difficult than usual. Sending his grandchildren to him as prisoners in everything but name is... Jon shook his head. He'll manage it. He'll turn it into something he controls. That's what Tywin does. He walked. It's better than the alternative. What's the alternative? Trial. Execution. A martyred 12-year-old Lannister whose death the Westerlands spend the next 30 years avenging. He looked at Robb. There's no clean version of this. There's only less damage and more damage, and I'm choosing less. The sisters, what they brought back. He found Arya in the stables. Not being kept there, having gone there because the stables were where Arya went when there was too much happening in the rooms, and the stables had horses, and horses were better than most of the people in King's Landing. She was sitting on a hay bale, cleaning a small sword that Jon did not recognize, working at the blade with a whetstone, and the specific focus of someone who found the sharpening meditative. "Needle," she said without looking up. "Jaqen, a man I met. He helped me get it back." Jon sat on the hay bale across from her. She looked at him, at the face she'd been imagining for months, her brother's face that was also a king's face now, which were two things she was having difficulty reconciling in the same person. "You look terrible," she said. "I've been riding for 8 months. You look like you haven't slept." "I've been king for 6 months. Sleep is not—" He stopped. "Arya." She looked at him. "Are you hurt?" He said it the way their father had said it, the direct northern inventory. Not "are you all right?" which was too large and too abstract, but the specific question that could be answered specifically. "No." She looked at the sword. "Scared, sometimes. Angry, always. But not hurt. The angry is fine." She met his gaze. "The angry is keeping me right. The angry is the thing that means I don't disappear into the being scared." She turned the sword over. "I want to learn to fight properly. Not yard fighting, not courtesy. Actual fighting." "I know someone," Jon said, "at the wall. Someone who teaches water dancing." He paused. "After we're done here. When things are—" "I know. After." She looked at him. "You're really king." "Yes. That's very strange. I'm aware. Does it feel like anything?" Jon thought about this. The real answer, rather than the political answer, the answer that was for Arya, specifically, because Arya could be told real things and would do something useful with them, rather than something complicated. "It feels like a responsibility I didn't choose and can't put down," he said. "Like the wall. Except the wall was about keeping something out, and this is about keeping something together. Do you think you can?" "I think I have to try." He held her gaze. "Which is not an answer, but it's the most honest thing I have." Arya nodded. The Arya nod. The acknowledgement that honesty was received and valued even when the honesty wasn't reassuring. "Father's alive," she said, "at the wall. That's—" She stopped. The specific Arya stop that was not emotion being managed, but emotion arriving unexpectedly and requiring a moment. "I thought, when they arrested him, I thought, I know. Is he— the wall is cold and he's 40, he's not young. He's a Stark. They're built for cold." Jon almost smiled. Almost. "And I'm going to pardon him the moment I sit in that throne. He'll be free to leave." "He won't leave," Arya said. "No, he won't. He's sworn now, and he'll keep the oath because he's Ned Stark." Jon looked at the sword in her hands. "But he'll know it was a choice. That's different from it being a cage." Sansa found him in the evening. She came to the solar that Jon had been using. The hand solar. The room that Ned Stark had occupied, and that Jon had taken because it was available, and because the ghost of it felt appropriate. The specific working room of a man who had tried to govern honestly from this city, and who had discovered that the trying was the whole of it. Sansa sat across from him and looked at him with the 12-year-old's eyes that were somehow older than 12. "You got my letters," she said. "Every one. They were." He stopped. The right word. Precise. More useful than most of the intelligence I received through official channels. She absorbed this with the Sansa manner, which was to receive a compliment and file it without displaying it. "I tried to make them useful. I couldn't fight. I couldn't run. I could watch and report. That's not nothing." "I know." She looked at the desk. At the papers on it, the correspondence, the administrative machinery of taking over a city that was already in mid-process. "You're going to have problems with the court," she said. "Tell me." The lords who supported Joffrey, not the Lannisters, the ones who served genuinely because the throne was the throne, and supporting the throne was what you did. They're embarrassed. They know the succession was false, but they served it anyway, because the alternative was treason. And now the thing they served is deposed, and the new king is a Targaryen who they didn't support. She held his gaze. They need to be able to tell themselves a story about how this transition is legitimate. About how what they did wasn't wrong. It was just incomplete. They need you to give them the narrative. What narrative? That you're the king they would have supported all along if they'd known. That the usurpation was the wrong, not their service. She looked at him. You have to make them feel like they're not traitors for having served the Lannisters, even though some of them are. Jon looked at her. You're 12, he said. I'm 12 and I've been at Cersei Lannister's court for 6 months. She held his gaze. I learned more about how power works in 6 months of being powerless in it than I learned in 11 years of Winterfell. She paused. I'm not glad it happened. But it happened, and I might as well use it. Jon looked at his sister. He thought, Ned Stark's daughter. In the specific sense, that mattered. I need an advisor, he said. Someone who understands the South. Someone who knows the court and the specific way it operates. He held her gaze. Not officially. Not with a title. You're too young and the lords would dismiss it. But actually, in practice. Sansa looked at him. Yes, she said. Not immediately. She took a breath first, the Sansa breath that preceded decisions. Yes, I'd do that. Good. He looked at the desk, at the correspondence, at the city outside the window. Start tomorrow. Tell me who to invite to council first and why. She pulled a chair closer to the desk. She began to talk. The throne. What sitting in it felt like. 299 AC. He sat in it the next morning. There was no ceremony. He had been told there would need to be a ceremony, a proper coronation, with the high septon and the lords assembled and the crown placed on his head, with the appropriate ritual gravity. That was coming. The ceremony was 3 weeks out, being planned by Sansa, with the specific Sansa attention to logistics that Jon had already started relying on, and that he was not going to think too hard about, because relying on it meant admitting he'd been wrong about something for a long time. But the sitting. He came to the throne room in the morning before the court assembled, before the advisors arrived, before Robb was up and the city's noise was fully awake. He came alone, and he walked to the Iron Throne, and he looked at it, and then he sat. The edges of it found him immediately. The swords at the sides pressed against his arms even through the padded leather. The angle of the back was slightly wrong, not agonizing, but present. The constant minor discomfort of a seat that had not been designed for comfort. The throne room from this height, from this specific position of elevation, looked different. The same room, the same torchlight, the same stone. But the room arranged itself differently from here. The distances changed. Things that had been close became far. He understood something about his father. Not Rhaegar, Ned, the man who had sat in this room for months, who had worked in the solar above, who had tried to do the right thing in a city built on doing the expedient thing. Ned had been uncomfortable the whole time. Not the throne. Ned had never sat in the throne. But the city, the court, the discomfort of being right in a place that punished rightness. Jon sat in the throne. He thought, this is the position. This is the thing that the claim means. Not the power, not the authority, but the seat. The specific commitment of being the person who sits here and makes decisions that can't be unmade. He thought, I have to be better at this than father was. He thought, that is not a small bar. He sat for 20 minutes. Then he got up and went to work. The small council. What Jon built. 299 AC. Sansa's list was 12 names long. Jon read it, crossed off 4, queried 2 others, and kept 6 as his starting candidates. He went over the selections with Robb, who had the specific northern perspective of a man who knew the North's lords well, and the South's not at all. and then with Catelyn, who had both. The small council he assembled was not the small council that any single faction wanted. It was the small council that covered the required functions with the minimum of mutually guaranteed destruction. Grand Maester Pycelle was removed. This was the easy part. Pycelle had been clearly in the Lannister pocket for years, and his loyalty to the old regime was not theoretical, but documented. He went to his chambers and was replaced by a Maester who had been at the Citadel long enough to have no living political debts, and who had the specific advantage of being genuinely interested in medicine rather than in politics. Varys stayed. This was Sansa's recommendation, and it surprised Jon enough that he asked her twice. Her argument: Varys serves whoever is making decisions that affect the realm. He was serving Joffrey because Joffrey was making those decisions. He will serve you. And you need someone who knows where every body in this city is buried, because the city has a lot of bodies. Jon had Varys brought to him. They talked for 3 hours. At the end of the 3 hours, Jon had not decided whether he trusted Varys, but he had decided that Varys was not a simple thing, and that simple things were not what the small council needed. He offered Varys the position. Varys accepted it with the specific expression of a man who had been expecting the offer, and who was genuinely pleased about the phrasing. Robb was not on the small council. This was the most important structural decision Jon made in the first week. Robb wanted to be not master of war, nothing formal, but present, which was the Robb way of being useful, and the thing Jon had been relying on. Jon said no. He explained it in the plainest terms he had. If you're on the council is northern. If the council is northern, every southern lord who's negotiating with it is negotiating with his enemy. I need a council that isn't the Northern Army's political arm, which means I need you elsewhere. Robb had looked at him. Where? Robb said. The North. Go home. Go back to Winterfell. Govern. Be the warden of the North in the actual functional sense, not the ceremonial sense. Jon held his gaze. I need someone in the North who I trust completely, and who understands the threat from beyond the wall, and who won't ignore the ravens when they start arriving. You're sending me home, Robb said. I'm sending you where you're needed most. Jon held the gaze. Which is not the South. The South has me and Sansa and Catelyn, and people who know it. The North needs you. Robb looked at him for a long time. The Wall, Robb said. The Wall, Jon confirmed. There are things coming. Things your father was trying to tell us. Things I started to understand at Castle Black before the letter arrived. He held the gaze. The South is the political problem. The North is the existential problem. I'm trying to handle them in the right order, and that means the most competent person I have goes where the existential problem is building. You're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to trust that I know what I know. Jon looked at his brother. I'm also your king, which means I'm technically giving you an order. But I'd rather you went because you understood. Do I have a choice? No. Robb almost laughed. The specific Robb laugh. The one that wasn't happy, but that was genuine. The laugh of a man encountering the specific absurdity of a situation he'd helped create. You're terrible at this. I'm learning. You just told me you were ordering me home, and then told me I had no choice in the span of 3 sentences. I'm working on the delivery, Jon said. Work faster. Robb stood. He looked at the council table, at the room, at the specific geometry of a city he had fought for, and that was now someone else's domain. I'll go home. I'll manage the North. I'll keep the Wall supplied and funded and staffed. He met Jon's eyes. But you write to me. Weekly. Honestly. None of the formal raven phrasing. Actual letters. I'll write. And when things go wrong down here, when the politics get too much, and you need someone to tell you the truth without managing it, you call for me. I will. Promise me. I promise. Robb left. Jon stood in the council chamber and felt the specific weight of what he'd just done settle over him. Robb going north was the right decision. The right decisions were always the ones that cost something. He'd been learning that since he was 16, and nothing about it had become easier. He sat down. He pulled the first letter toward him. He began to work. Ned. The Wall. The Pardon. 299 AC. The Pardon went north by Raven. Jon had written it 3 times. Not because the legal language was difficult. The pardons office had a form for this, a standard royal pardon that required filling specific blanks. And the blanks were not complicated. He'd written it 3 times because every time he picked up the pen to write by royal decree, I hereby pardon, he had to stop and sit with the specific weight of writing his father's name in a royal document as the person being pardoned. The 3rd draft he sent. The Raven reached Castle Black in 4 days. Mormont received it and brought it to Ned himself, which was the Lord Commander's specific courtesy, the man who had let Jon go the morning Jon had ridden south, who had filed the report of Ranger lost beyond the wall, and who had maintained the fiction for 6 months with the specific institutional discretion of a man who understood when the mission was more important than the paperwork. Mormont handed Ned the Raven. Ned read it in the yard. He'd been at the wall for 4 months by then. He'd arrived in early autumn, and the wall had processed him the way the wall processed everything. Stripped the titles, issued the black, assigned the duties. He'd been assigned to the stewards, which was either a recognition of his administrative capability or an irony the Lord Commander was too tactful to make explicit. He'd been at the wall for 4 months, and in that time he'd learned the wall the way you learn places you hadn't chosen, thoroughly, from the ground up, with the specific attention that people paid when there was nothing else to distract them from the paying. He knew the cold. Not the Winterfell cold, the manageable cold of a northern castle with hot springs and ancient heating. The wall cold, the cold that had purpose and direction, that was building in the north the way storms built before they arrived. He'd felt it every day on the battlements, and he'd read the Rangers' reports, and he'd talked to Maester Aemon, and the Maester had told him things that matched what the Rangers reported, and what the Rangers reported was. Something is coming. He read the pardon. He read, I hereby pardon Lord Eddard Stark of all charges, real and fabricated, held against him by the previous regime. His honor is restored. His titles are restored. His freedom is restored. The Night's Watch vows are another matter. Those are between him and the Watch. The Crown makes no claim on them. I'm told you'll stay regardless. I think you're right. The wall needs you. I need someone there I trust. Your son, Jon. Ned stood in the yard with the pardon in his hand. He was free. The king had freed him. The king who was his son, who was not his son, who was the secret he'd carried for 16 years, and who had apparently picked up the secret and used it to win a war and take a throne and send his father a pardon with a note that was as close to Ned's own writing style as anything he'd read in years. Mormont appeared beside him. Is it what you expected? More, Ned said. He looked at the pardon. He signed it, Jon Stark. Is that wrong? No. Ned folded the pardon, put it in his cloak. It's exactly right. He looked at the north, at the wall and beyond it. He needs men. He needs the wall funded and supplied and staffed. He'll send men when he can. He needs them now. Ned looked at the Lord Commander. The cold is wrong. The ranging reports. You've read them. Something is building. I know. Tell the king. He held the gaze. In the most direct terms available. Not the diplomatic version. The wall is undermanned and undersupplied, and what is north of it is real, and it is coming, and it requires a response that the realm has not provided in 8,000 years. He held Mormont's gaze. Make him understand. He came from here, Mormont said. He was here 6 months. He already knows. Then remind him, Ned said. Kings forget. Not from malice. From the weight of everything else pressing on them. He looked north. Remind him. I'll write, Mormont said. Ned looked at the pardon in his cloak. He could leave. The pardon freed him. He could go south, back to Winterfell, back to Catelyn and the children, and the specific domestic life that had been interrupted by this entire catastrophe. He could govern. He could be the warden of the north in the actual functional sense, and leave the wall to the watch that was built for it. He stayed. He stayed because Mormont was right. Jon had been here, and knew. And the knowing required the specific, ongoing reminder that someone at the wall was able to provide, and that letters could not fully carry. He stayed because the cold was wrong, and the ranging reports were bad, and the wall needed men who understood what they were looking at. He stayed because his son had written, "I need someone there I trust," and Ned Stark did not walk away from that. He put the pardon away. He went back to work. The coronation, what the realm saw, 299 AC. 3 weeks after arriving in King's Landing, Jon was crowned. The ceremony was in the Sept of Baelor, which was Sansa's recommendation for reasons she'd explained concisely. The city worships the Seven. You worship the old gods. The coronation in the Sept says, "I respect what this city believes, even if I don't share it." The coronation in the throne room says, "I serve only power. The Sept costs you nothing and gains you goodwill. You can't buy otherwise." Jon had agreed, and had not told Sansa that he found the Sept aesthetically overwhelming, which he did. It was very large and very gold, and very full of stained glass that depicted events he was not related to in any way. He sat through the High Septon's blessing, with the expression he reserved for situations where the appropriate response was respectful attendance rather than engagement. The lords assembled. They came from across the realm. Not all of them. Not yet. The submission process was ongoing, and some houses were still deciding which way the political weather was blowing. But the major lords were there. The Northerners who had fought for him. The Riverlands lords who had suffered through the war. Lord Mallister, who had committed his fleet. The Stormlands lords who had been Stannis' men, and who were now recalculating with the specific wariness of people who had backed a claim that hadn't resolved the way they'd expected. The Tyrells were not there. This was the notable absence. Highgarden had sent formal acknowledgement, but not a delegation, which was the Tyrell method of communicating. "We have not decided yet, and we want you to know that we have not decided, and the knowing should motivate you to give us terms worth deciding for." Sansa had flagged this a week before the coronation, and Jon had noted it and set it aside because it was a real problem, but it was not the immediate problem. He sat in the throne before the assembled lords, and the High Septon placed the crown on his head. It was lighter than he expected. The crown was not the Baratheon crown, and it was not the Targaryen crown. Both of those had been melted down in the chaos following the rebellion, and reproduced imperfectly, and then left in storage. Jon had been presented with 3 options, and had chosen the plainest, a circlet of Valyrian steel, dark and simple, the metal that Targaryen smiths had worked in the time before the Doom, and that carried no specific iconography, except the specific quality of being what it was. He looked at the assembled lords. He said, "I am Jon, of houses Stark and Targaryen. My mother was Lyanna Stark, of the north. My father was Rhaegar Targaryen, of the Dragon. I was raised by Eddard Stark of Winterfell, who kept me alive with a lie for 16 years, because I couldn't survive the truth." He paused. "I am not going to lie to you. I'm not going to tell you this transition was clean, or that the war was necessary, or that the men who died fighting it died in a cause that was worth every one of them. They died for a kingdom that wasn't right with itself. My job is to make it right with itself, and to keep it right." The room was quiet. "The debts will be paid. The reconstruction of the Riverlands will be funded from the crown, not from the houses that had to fight through them. The Night's Watch will receive the men and support it, has been requesting for 50 years, because the wall is not ceremonial, and what is north of it is real." He looked at the lords. "These are promises I'm making in this room, because this room is what I have to make promises to. You will hold me to them. That is your function. Mine is to keep them." The High Septon intoned the blessing. Jon heard it with the specific northern detachment of a man who believed in the old gods, and who was in a sept, and who understood that the ritual was for the people watching, not for himself. Then it was done. He was crowned. He was king. The room made the sound that rooms made at such moments, the collective intake, the specific atmospheric shift. Not all of the faces in the room were warm. Some were calculating. Some were resigned. Some were the faces of men who had not wanted this, and who were doing the northern thing of accepting it, because the not wanting was beside the point. Jon looked at the room. He thought, this is what Father tried to do in this city. He thought, I have to do it differently. He thought, I have to do it better. The ceremony ended. The work resumed. The Tyrells.
What Highgarden wanted. 299 AC. Olenna Tyrell arrived in King's Landing on a Tuesday without being invited. Not unannounced, she sent word that she was coming, which was the Olenna method of telling rather than asking. The difference between a Tyrell invitation and a Tyrell announcement was the difference between a question and a statement, and Olenna Tyrell had not phrased things as questions in 40 years. Jon received her in the small council chamber, which was a choice Varys had recommended. Not the throne room. The throne room is a performance space, and Lady Olenna knows how to perform. The council chamber is a working space. She'll be slightly less comfortable. Discomfort is a negotiating advantage. Jon had looked at Varys when he said this. Varys had looked back with the specific Varys expression that communicated absolutely nothing. Olenna came in and sat down without being invited to sit, which was itself a message. She looked at Jon. He looked at her. "You're younger than I expected," she said. "You're exactly as you were described," he said. "Described how?" "Old, sharp, and several moves ahead of whoever she's talking to." He held the gaze. "I was told not to underestimate you." "Who told you that?" "My sister. She's been studying court politics from the inside." He paused. "She finds you impressive. That's not easy." "Your sister?" Olenna considered this. The older girl. The one who was Joffrey's betrothed. Sansa. She survived Joffrey's court. That's not nothing. Olenna tilted her head. "She advised you to put me in this room, rather than the throne room. Among other things. Tell her she was right." Olenna's hands folded on the table. "I came because Mace was getting ready to send a delegation, and the delegation would have been Mace, which would have been an insult to both of us. So I came instead." She looked at him. "You want the Reach." "The Reach would help," Jon said. "The Reach is grain and swords and the most intact military force in the Seven Kingdoms after your own. You need the Reach to consolidate. You need us to signal to the other southern houses that the Targaryen restoration is real, and not a northern problem they can wait out." She paused. "What do we want in return?" "Tell me." "Margaery." She held his gaze. She was going to be queen. She was trained for it. The training produced something. The something should not go to waste. Jon sat with this. "I can't marry on the political timeline that would satisfy you," he said. "I'm a new king in an unstable realm. The succession question needs to be addressed eventually, but not immediately. If I marry immediately, I look like I'm managing the Reach rather than governing the realm." "You are managing the Reach." "Yes, but the kingdom shouldn't look like I am." He held her gaze. "I can offer you the genuine consideration. Not a betrothal, a relationship that is being built correctly. Margaery would come to court. Not as a betrothed, as a person of influence. If the relationship develops into something, you're asking me to wait. I'm asking you to invest in something that has a real chance rather than a political arrangement that might produce nothing more than resentment." He looked at her. "You've managed one marriage of your granddaughter to a monster. I'm not a monster. But I'm also not a finished product yet. I've been king for 3 weeks. Give me time to be worth marrying, and I'll be worth marrying." Olenna looked at him for a long time. "You're going to ask me to make a strategic bet on a king who might be deposed next year," she said. "I'm going to ask you to make a strategic bet on the king with the strongest legal claim in the Seven Kingdoms, a functional army, and the Starks of the North as family." He met the gaze. "My brothers and sisters may be the most motivated defenders I have. The North will bleed for them. That's not a political calculation. That's what the North does for its blood. The North is far from Highgarden. The North is very far from Highgarden, which is why the relationship between them needs something, someone, in the middle." He held her gaze. "I'm offering the Reach, a king who needs them, and who knows he needs them, and who will not pretend otherwise." Olenna sat back. She tapped her chin. The specific Olenna gesture that Sansa had described to Jon as, "She's deciding. Don't add anything. Let her decide." He didn't add anything. Margaery comes to court, Olenna said. Not as a betrothed, as a lady of quality whose presence is appropriate to the season. Yes. And the grain supply. Negotiated at fair market rates with preferential terms for the Crown's long-term purchases, reflecting the Reach's production advantages and the Crown's stability advantages. He paused. Varys will have the numbers. Of course he will. She stood. You're better at this than Joffrey was. Joffrey was 13. He was 13 at the end. Still terrible. She looked at him. Your sister really is very good. I'm aware. Olenna left. Jon sat in the council chamber and thought about Margaery Tyrell, about what offering her a genuine relationship rather than a political one meant, whether he was being honest or strategic or both. The line between honesty and strategy was one he was learning to walk. He thought it was important to walk rather than to pick one side. He thought about the wall, about the letters from Mormont, about the things building in the north that made the Tyrell negotiation look small. He had two problems, and the smaller one was currently the only one he was allowed to address directly. He picked up the next letter. The debt. What the realm owed. 299 AC. The Riverlands were destroyed. This was the specific cost of the war that Jon had not understood until he was in it. The burning, the crop failure, the specific collapse of a region's agricultural infrastructure that took years to produce and that was dismantled in weeks by Tywin Lannister's policy of making resistance expensive. House Tully held Riverrun. The castle stood. Everything between the castle and the nearest towns was wrecked. Edmure Tully, the Lord of Riverrun, came to King's Landing 6 weeks after the coronation. Jon had not met Edmure before, and had formed expectations from Catelyn's descriptions, which were affectionate but not uncritical. Catelyn loved her brother the way you love someone who meant well, and who was frequently wrong about what the meaning well required. Edmure was a man of genuine feeling in a political environment that punished genuine feeling, which made him useful and dangerous in roughly equal measure. He arrived with the specific bearing of a man who had lost his uncle to the Lannisters and his region to their armies, and who was now in the court of a new king, asking for something he shouldn't have to ask for. Jon received him in the small council chamber. The Riverlands need reconstruction money, Edmure said. He said it without preamble, which Jon recognized as the decision to be direct before the shame of asking could make the asking impossible. Grain, timber, the basic material to rebuild what was burned. My lords are, my people are. They fought for the right side, and it cost them everything. Yes, Jon said. Edmure looked at him. Yes to what? Yes to the reconstruction money. Yes to the grain. Yes to the timber. Jon held the gaze. The Riverlands fought because the Riverlands were right to fight. That shouldn't cost them their livelihoods. He looked at Sansa, who was in the room, as she was always in the room now, at the corner of the table with her notes. We discussed the numbers last week. 20,000 gold dragons for immediate material needs, Sansa said. Another 30 over 5 years tied to specific reconstruction projects with reporting requirements. Edmure blinked. He had not expected the numbers to be ready. He had come prepared to negotiate for them, and they were already on the table. That's more than I came expecting to receive, he said. It's what's needed, Jon said. I'm not going to give you less than what's needed, and call it generosity. He looked at Edmure. The Riverlands are the heart of the kingdom. The roads, the rivers, the crossings. If the Riverlands are broken, the kingdom is broken. Fixing them is not charity. It's governance. Edmure sat with that. Your father, he said. Ned Stark. Catelyn's, my sister's husband. He tried to do what was right. He did. He paid for it. He did. He's alive. Jon looked at the table, at the numbers, at the specific accumulated arithmetic of rebuilding a war. The paying stopped. What follows is the rebuilding. He met Edmure's gaze. I'd like your help with that. Not just the Riverlands, the realm. You know the middle of the kingdom better than anyone. I need people who know the middle. Edmure looked at him. He said, Catelyn said you weren't what she expected. What did she expect?
She didn't say, but I can tell she meant it as a compliment. He held the gaze. I'll help. Good. Jon pushed the numbers toward him. Start with these. Ghost, the king's other companion, 299 AC. The court did not know what to do with Ghost. This was the ongoing administrative problem that nobody had formally raised with Jon, because nobody wanted to be the person who told the king that his direwolf was making the servants nervous. The servants were definitely nervous. The guards were less nervous, but were performing nervousness on the servants' behalf, which was its own kind of court politics. Ghost was white and enormous and silent in the way that was not the silence of sleeping things, but the silence of things that were fully awake and choosing not to announce it. He moved through the corridors of the Red Keep at night when Jon worked late. He lay in the corner of the small council chamber during sessions. He had once appeared in the throne room during a formal reception and scared a Stormland's lord into spilling wine on his own doublet. Jon found this privately funny and publicly maintained the expression of a king who was managing a delicate situation. Varys was the one who raised it, which was appropriate because Varys raised everything that other people wouldn't. Your Grace, he said, during a brief moment between appointments when they were in the corridor, and Ghost was walking alongside Jon with the specific ghost gate that was designed for terrain that was not corridors, and that adapted by being slightly contained. The direwolf. Ghost. Ghost. Yes. The lords who have come to court are, finding his presence notable. Good. Jon looked ahead. He is notable. Some of them find him disconcerting. Good, Jon said again. I'd rather they were disconcerted than comfortable. Comfortable lords stopped paying attention. Varys was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was filing information. That is a notably northern approach to court management. I grew up at Winterfell. Jon glanced at him. The wolves are part of the family. Ghost was the one who stayed. He's been with me since I was 15. He paused. He makes it harder to lie. People lie less often when there's a very large predator in the room who is watching them with apparent interest. Varys looked at Ghost. Ghost looked at Varys. Ghost's red eyes were entirely calm and entirely unreadable, which was a quality that Varys and the direwolf shared, and that Varys was recognizing with the specific expression of a man encountering a peer in an unexpected form. He's an asset, Varys said finally. He is. I had not considered him from that angle. He makes the throne room feel like the North, Jon said. Slightly colder than comfortable, slightly less predictable. That's what the throne room should be. Varys looked at Ghost one more time. I am going to note, Varys said, that I find this entire conversation impressive and slightly alarming. Good, Jon said. That was the intended effect. Catelyn, what she saw in him. 299 AC. Catelyn stayed in King's Landing for 6 months after the coronation. Not because she was required to, the terms didn't require her, Jon didn't require her, Robb had gone north, and the north was being managed. She stayed because the kingdom needed managing, and the managing required someone who had been doing it for 20 years, and who understood the specific machinery of running a household that had grown from a castle to a city. She stayed because Jon needed her. She wouldn't have put it that way to him. She wouldn't have put it to herself that way for months. And when she finally did, it was in the Godswood of the Red Keep, which was not the Godswood at Winterfell. And that was the wrong religion for her. But that was where she went when she needed to think without interruption. She sat by the heart tree that someone had planted here decades ago, the tree that was old enough to have a face, and young enough that the face was unformed. And she thought about the boy she had been cold to for 16 years, who was now king, and who was managing the kingdom with the specific quality that she had been watching develop across the months. He was not Ned. This was the thing she kept returning to. She'd expected Jon to be Ned in some essential sense. The same honor, the same directness, the same northern gravity that looked like stubbornness, and was actually just the weight of taking things seriously. And those things were there. But they were paired with something else. Something that was not Stark. She thought, it's Targaryen. Not the madness. There was no madness in him. not the fire in the specific dramatic sense. The other thing, the ability to hold multiple competing considerations simultaneously and weigh them against each other, and arrive at a decision that accounted for all of them. Rhaegar had been described that way. Aemon had that quality. The old master, whom she had met briefly, had that same ability to hold complexity without requiring it to resolve. Jon governed by holding complexity. Ned had governed by doing the right thing, and trusting that the right thing would produce right outcomes. The right thing had killed him. Jon governed by doing the right thing in the specific way that the situation required, which was sometimes the same as what Ned would have done, and sometimes different, and sometimes things that Ned could never have done, because Ned had not been able to act against his own sense of honor, and Jon had learned. She didn't know how or when, perhaps at the wall, perhaps simply from watching Ned fail, that honor was the foundation and not the method. She thought about the letter Ned had sent from the Black Cells, the specific courage of it. The man who had kept the secret for 16 years, who had refused to tell her, who had refused to tell anyone. That man had picked up a pen in a cell and written the truth because he was about to die, and the dying required the truth to be somewhere other than himself. She thought. Ned trusted Jon with the truth he wouldn't trust me with. She thought. He was right to. She was not jealous. The jealousy had passed in the months of the war, in the watching of Jon manage the thing the letter had started. She looked for the word. Not jealous. Proud, which was strange. Not of herself. Of the boy. The man. The king. She was proud of Jon the way she was proud of Robb, which was the way you were proud of people who went into impossible situations and came out of them having done the thing the situation required. She walked back into the Red Keep. Jon was in the corridor outside the council chamber, reading a letter that had arrived with the latest batch. He looked up when she came in. He had the specific Jon face when he was dealing with something difficult. The slight compression. The working jaw that was so like Ned, it was briefly disorienting. "What is it?" she said. "Stannis Baratheon hasn't submitted." He held the letter. "He's at Storm's End. He's called my claim invalid on the grounds that the Targaryen dynasty was deposed and that a deposed dynasty cannot restore its claim by birth. He says the throne passed to Robert and from Robert to his heirs, which makes him the rightful king." "He's not wrong about the legal argument," Catelyn said. "No, his legal argument is coherent." Jon looked at the letter. "The problem is that coherent and correct are not the same thing. His argument requires ignoring the specific evidence of the marriage, which is documented, witnessed, with a living witness." He held Catelyn's gaze. "He's going to fight. He might negotiate. He doesn't negotiate from weakness. He negotiates from principle, and his principle says he's right." Jon set the letter down. "I need to go to Storm's End." Jon, not with an army, alone, with Howland Reed and the documentation. He held her gaze. "Stannis Baratheon believes in law. He will follow the law if the law is clear. I need to make the law clear to him in a room where it's just us and the evidence. And if he arrests you, then Robb comes south and the war resumes, and eventually Stannis loses because he doesn't have the numbers." He looked at her. "But I don't think he'll do that. He's not Cersei. He's not Joffrey. He's a man who believes in something, and I need to demonstrate that the thing he believes in points at me." Catelyn looked at her son's brother, at the king, at the person who was both. "Your father would have done this," she said. "I know. He would have done it, and it would have gone wrong, because he would have been too honest about the wrong things at the wrong moment." Jon looked at her. "I'm not planning to be too honest," he said. "I'm planning to be honest about the right things, and keep the wrong things for later." "That's not your father's approach." "No." He held her gaze. "My father's approach got him killed. I'm trying something different." Catelyn looked at him. "Take Davos Seaworth with you," she said. "He's been Stannis' most trusted man for years. If Stannis respects anyone's counsel, it's Davos. Davos is Stannis' man. Davos is a honest man. Honest men respond to honest arguments. She held his gaze. Make the honest argument, and let Davos tell Stannis whether it's true. Jon considered this. Where do I find Davos Seaworth? He's at Storm's End with Stannis, Catelyn said. That's actually where honest men who love their king tend to be. Jon and Catelyn, the conversation they hadn't had. 299 AC. She found him in the solar in the middle of the night, not because she was looking for him. She had been to the Godswood and was returning, the specific midnight route that she had taken to making, because the Red Keep's Godswood was the one place in the city that didn't require her to be anything except a woman in a garden. And she'd been taking it for weeks. Jon was in the solar because Jon was always in the solar in the middle of the night, reading letters that required reading, and writing letters that required writing, and doing the work that kings did at midnight, when they'd spent their days at the work that kings did in daylight. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. Ghost, in the corner, lifted one red eye, and then closed it again. I wasn't going to disturb you, Catelyn said. You're not. He set down the pen. Come in. She sat across from him, the desk between them, the candles, the specific midnight quiet of a room in a working castle. I owe you an apology, she said. Jon was still. Not for now. For all of it. For Winterfell. For the years of... She stopped, found the right word through the wrong ones. Coldness. I was cold to you for 16 years, because I believed a lie that Ned told to protect you, and I never asked whether it was true. I just absorbed it and made it part of how I treated you. Jon was quiet for a moment. You didn't know, he said. That's not an excuse. You were a child. I was the adult in the house, and the child didn't deserve what the adult gave him. She held his gaze. I know you know this. I'm not telling you something you don't know. I'm saying it out loud because I should have said it sooner, and I kept not saying it. And now you're king. And if I don't say it now, I'll be waiting for a time that never arrives. Jon looked at her, the Jon look that she'd spent years reading wrong. Reading as Targaryen, as the ghost of the woman she'd been afraid of, as the evidence of the wrong she'd been convinced her husband had done. Reading it now, knowing what she knew, it was Lyanna. It was the Stark in him. It was the specific quality of a person receiving something difficult and holding it carefully rather than dropping it or throwing it. You loved your children, he said. That was never in question. How you felt about me was the consequence of what you'd been told, not who you were. It still hurt you. Yes. He said it directly, which she appreciated. Not it was fine or it doesn't matter. Yes. It hurt. I understood it later. Not at the time. At the time I was a child, and children don't understand why the world is arranged the way it is. They just live in it. He looked at the desk. Later, I understood. You were given information that made me a threat to your family, and you managed the threat in the only way available to you, which was distance. That's more generous than it deserved. Maybe, but it's the truth of it. He held her gaze. You came south when Robb called. You managed the war. You helped make this. He gestured vaguely at the room, the city, the crown that was not currently on his head, but that was present in everything. You helped make this possible. That's not debt, but it's not nothing either. Catelyn sat with this. She thought. He is exactly what Ned raised, and nothing like what Ned was. She said, when your father reads the pardon. When he reads it, Jon said quietly. When he reads it. She held his gaze. He's going to know that you've done something he tried to do for 16 years. That he spent 16 years managing the secret, and you spent 3 months using it. She paused. That must be strange to contemplate. He did what the situation required, Jon said. So did I. The situations were different. He'll be proud. He'll be relieved, Jon said. Which is better. He looked at the candle. Proud is for when things go well. Relieved is for when things go well enough. Catelyn looked at him. She said, I'm proud of you. if that means anything from the wrong side of 16 years. Jon looked at her. Something crossed his face. Not the display of emotion, not the performance of being moved. The actual thing. The specific, quiet look of a person receiving something they'd needed a long time ago, and that was arriving late but whole. "It means something," he said. They sat for a while longer. The candles burned low. The city was quiet outside. Storm's End. Stannis. The Argument of Law. 299 AC. Storm's End was exactly what its name described. Not the storm. The end. The thing that remained after the storm had passed through and taken everything soft with it. The castle on the cliff above the Shipbreaker Bay was not beautiful and did not try to be. It was old and it was strong, and it had been built by people who believed that the point of a castle was to not fall down, and it had not fallen down, which was the measure of success in things that were designed to endure. Stannis received Jon in the Great Hall. He did not come to the gate. He did not come to the yard. He received Jon in the Great Hall, seated, in the position that communicated, "I am not acknowledging your claim by meeting you as an equal." The specific Stannis message, delivered through protocol rather than words. Jon sat across from him. Two kings in the same room, which was the specific political arrangement that every lord in the Seven Kingdoms was watching, and that would determine the next phase of everything. "You came alone," Stannis said. "I came with Howland Reed and the documentation," Jon said. "If I came with an army, this would be a siege, and not a conversation. I can withstand a siege. I know, that's why I didn't bring an army." Jon held his gaze. "I brought the truth. I'd like to show it to you." Stannis looked at him. The specific Stannis assessment. The jaw, the grinding. The look of a man processing information through a framework that was precise and reliable, and that he had been applying his whole life, and that he was now applying to a person who was claiming something the framework had not previously been asked to evaluate. "Show me," Stannis said. Howland Reed presented the evidence. He laid it out in the systematic way he'd laid it out for Robb and Catelyn, but adapted, because Stannis was not Robb, and Stannis was not Catelyn. Stannis was a man who responded to law and precedent and documentation, and Howland shaped the presentation accordingly. He presented the timeline first, the dates, the location, the movements of Rhaegar and Lyanna. He presented the testimony, what he had seen, what he had heard, the specific events at the Tower of Joy. He produced the documentation Catelyn had found, a maester's record from a small sept in the Reach, the record of a marriage conducted in Dorne in 282 AC between Rhaegar of House Targaryen and Lyanna of House Stark. Stannis read the documents. He read them with the specific Stannis thoroughness, every word, twice, the grinding internal process of a man applying exacting standards to a new input. Then, he set them down. "The marriage makes him the true-born heir of the Targaryen line," Stannis said. "I accept that argument." Jon had not expected the accepting to come so quickly. "But," Stannis said, "there it was. The Targaryen dynasty was deposed. Robert's rebellion ended the Targaryen claim. The throne was taken by conquest, and held by conquest, and the law of conquest is. Robert won. The winning established the new succession. The throne passed from Robert to his heirs, and Robert's true-born heirs are..." He stopped. "Joffrey is a bastard. I've been saying that for a year. The throne passed to me. That is the law." "That's one reading of the law," Jon said. "It's the correct reading. The correct reading of the law of conquest is that the conquest establishes the claim of the conqueror. Robert's claim was established by his victory over Aerys. Robert's claim was not established by any argument about Targaryen succession. He didn't win on succession. He won by defeating an army in the field." Jon held the gaze. If Robert's claim was founded on conquest rather than succession, then the claim is transferable by conquest to someone who defeats Robert's successor, which I have done. You're claiming by conquest. I'm claiming by the combination of succession and conquest. My succession claim predates Robert's conquest. It was hidden, not eliminated. The restoration of the claim through documentation and evidence is your interpretation." Stannis said. "It is, and yours is different, and both are legally defensible." Jon leaned forward. "Lord Stannis, I'm not going to defeat your argument in this room. Your argument is coherent. Your principles are sound. You believe in the law, and the law has a version of events that supports your claim." He met the gaze. But the realm doesn't care about legal coherence. The realm is choosing between the man who won the war and the man who is going to force another one. And the man who forces another war in a realm that has been at war for a year is going to lose the argument with history, regardless of whether he wins the legal argument. Stannis was quiet. Davos Seaworth, standing behind his king, was watching Jon with the specific attention of a man who was reading the room carefully. "I'm offering you something," Jon said. "Not compromise. I'm not dividing the throne. I'm offering you the position you should have had, the king's right hand. The man who does the work that kings are supposed to delegate, and that most kings delegate, to people who don't actually believe in what they're doing." He held the gaze. "You believe in law. You believe in honest governance. You believe in doing the necessary thing regardless of whether it's the popular thing. Those qualities are wasted at Storm's End and they are desperately needed in King's Landing." Stannis looked at him for a long time. "You're offering me the handship," he said. "I'm offering you the handship and the genuine authority that goes with it, not the managed version, not the decorative hand who approves what the king decides. The functional version, the version where I tell you what I'm trying to do and you tell me whether it's right, and if you think it's wrong, you tell me why, and I listen." Jon held the gaze. "I've been king for 3 weeks. I don't know how to do this. You've been practicing how to do it right your entire life, and then watching people do it wrong. I need that." Davos moved slightly. Not speaking, but the movement communicated something that Stannis registered, and that Jon registered. Stannis ground his jaw. "You're asking me to accept a situation that is legally ambiguous," he said. "I'm asking you to accept a situation that is politically real," Jon said. "The law will follow. The law always follows reality when reality is sufficiently established. Establish the reality with me and the law will catch up. That's not how you prefer to operate." "I know." Jon held the gaze. "But it's how kingdoms work, and it's how this kingdom is going to work, and the question is whether you're inside it or outside it." A very long silence. Davos looked at Stannis. Stannis looked at Jon. "You're Ned Stark's." He stopped. "You were raised by Ned Stark." "I was." "He said you weren't his. He said it was complicated." Stannis's voice was doing the thing it did when he was processing something that didn't fit the framework, the specific grinding that was either anger or thinking, and was often both. "He was protecting you?" "He was." "He died protecting you?" "He didn't die. He's at the wall." Jon held the gaze. "Alive. Because he made a choice I didn't ask him to make, and that I'm going to spend a long time being grateful for." Stannis looked at the documents on the table. "The hand's position," he said. "Yes. With real authority. Real authority. And when we disagree, we argue, and I make the final decision. And if I'm wrong, you tell me I'm wrong, and explain why. And I consider the explanation." Jon met the gaze. "That's what kings are supposed to have. Someone who tells them they're wrong." Stannis ground his jaw one more time. Then, "Davos?" "Your Grace," Davos said. "What do you think?" Davos was quiet for a moment. The specific Davos moment of a man who had been asked his opinion by someone he loved, and who was going to give it honestly, regardless of whether the honesty was what was wanted. "I think," Davos said, "that this is the first time anyone has asked you to do something that is both right and practical at the same time, and that the combination makes you suspicious." He met Stannis's gaze. "I think you should say yes." Stannis looked at Jon. "Yes," Stannis said. What if Ned Stark crowned Jon Snow king? He did it in a letter, not with ceremony, not with announcement, not with the specific public declaration that Westeros required for political events to be real. He did it in a letter from a cell, with a bribed guard and a secret that had been eating at him for 16 years. And that couldn't survive his death unexpressed. He sent the letter. Jon received it at the wall, where the world was already cold and getting colder. He read it, standing in the yard with a direwolf at his leg, and 100 watchbrothers, who didn't know they were in the presence of a king. He read it and felt the world change shape, and he did the thing that Ned's children, the ones born to him and the one borrowed,
always did when the world changed shape. He went north, and then he went to do what needed doing.
There was an argument. There were several arguments. Robb argued it with him, and then argued for him, which was Robb's specific genius, the ability to change his mind and then fight harder for the new position than he'd fought for the old one. Catelyn processed it, and then planned it. The Tully pragmatism turning the impossible into the achievable through the specific mechanism of very good logistics. Howland Reed stood in front of Lords and said what he'd seen with his own eyes in a tower in Dawn 16 years ago. The Lords accepted it because Robb put his credibility behind it, and because the Great Jon went first, and because Jon said something true in a tent in the Riverlands, and truth in that room landed differently than truth in King's Landing had ever landed for his father. Walder Frey negotiated and got the better end of the deal and thought he hadn't, and was irritated about it, which was the best outcome available with Walder Frey. Robb won the war because Robb won wars. That was Robb's function, the thing he'd been built for, and the function performed exactly as the builder intended. Tywin submitted because Tywin understood arithmetic, and the arithmetic said, the war is lost. The Lannister position survived because Tywin was the most competent manager of surviving losses in the realm. Sansa came home from court having learned things that court shouldn't have taught her, and that she applied to the problem of running a kingdom with the specific usefulness of someone who had been educated in the exact institution she was now opposing. Arya came home carrying a small sword and years of anger, and the specific Arya quality of turning what had been done to her into something she could do. Jon sat in the Iron Throne. It cut him. Everything about it cut him. The edges, the weight, the specific discomfort of being the person responsible for the decisions that couldn't be unmade. He sat in it and governed, and sometimes he was right, and sometimes he was wrong, and the times he was wrong he had Stannis to tell him so, and the times he was right he had Sansa to tell him why it worked, and the times he didn't know what to do he wrote a letter to his father on the wall. Ned wrote back. Always, even in the cold, even in the short northern letters that said more in 3 lines than most people said in 3 pages. Always, the wall was the problem that the war had been a distraction from. Jon knew this. He'd known it since Castle Black, since Mormont's office, since Maester Aemon's rooms, where a 100-year-old Targaryen told him that the choice he was being given was not a small one. The wall was where the existential threat lived, and the existential threat was building the way existential threats built, slowly, visibly, to those who looked, ignored by those who didn't. He looked. He kept his father on the wall, and kept the ravens coming, and kept the funding flowing, and kept the watch staffed, and kept the kingdom stable enough that when the ravens from the north said, it's time, the kingdom would be ready. Whether the kingdom would be ready was the question that the throne room couldn't answer. That answer lived north of the wall. In the cold, in the building dark, Ned Stark had carried the truth for 16 years. Jon Snow had spent 3 months carrying the crown. The crown was heavier. He kept wearing it. He didn't stop working. He wrote to his father.